Chapter 714. As mentioned before, Wu Ming cheated by bringing his noble phantasm, 12 avatars of authority, to this spiritual base. However, the ability of these 12 avatars could only be used once in this spiritual base. Once one of them was used, there would be one less avatar, just like a consumable item. Wu Ming summoned Skywing and Abendheim using the 8th avatar, so Wu Ming only had 11 avatars left. When Wu Ming made the pseudo-heavenly lock, he deliberately used one of the remaining 11 avatars. Wu Ming added the 5th avatar's annihilation characteristic to the pseudo-heavenly lock, which made the person bound by the pseudo-heavenly lock be annihilated. Of course, Wu Ming could choose what to annihilate the other party, whether it was the body or the magical power. It was up to Wu Ming's precise control. Wu Ming chose the magical power released from the surface of Giliel's skin to annihilate, so Giliel's body was not damaged. However, this was not without drawbacks. The pseudo-heavenly lock with the annihilation characteristic could no longer retain the ability to restrain divinity. Originally, Wu Ming could use high-grade items to create the pseudo-heavenly lock with the effect of restraining divinity, but when the avatar of annihilation was added to the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock, the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock were annihilated. Or it should be said that the ability of annihilation annihilated the characteristics of the pseudo-heavenly lock. And because there was only one characteristic of the heavenly lock, that was, the higher the divinity of the person bound, the tighter the heavenly lock would bind. Therefore, after the annihilation characteristic was added, the restraining divinity characteristic disappeared. But that didn't matter. After all, the pseudo-heavenly lock could be recreated. On the contrary, the chains with the annihilation characteristic could only be found by chance. After all, Wu Ming's annihilation avatar had been used, and there were only 10 avatars left. Although the 12 incarnations had become a consumable item, Razin still had to use it. After all, if he didn't use it, why would Wu Ming bother to bring the 12 incarnations here? Controlling the pseudo-sky lock, or rather the annihilation lock, Wu Ming sent the unconscious Jillian into the portal. Jillian's unconsciousness wasn't caused by Wu Ming's annihilation lock. It was only because Jillian had overused her mana. Generally speaking, excessive mana consumption would only cause one to become extremely weak. Worse, one might not even be able to maintain a physical body and be forced to enter a spiritual state. The main reason why Jillian was unconscious was that Wu Ming had forcefully stopped her while she was flying at high speed. When she released her mana, it was instantly annihilated, causing her to fall unconscious. While Gopral was unconscious, Wu Ming had already connected to Gopral's spirit base and started providing her with magic power. Although Wu Ming had consumed a lot of mana when summoning the Skywing species and a Bante, Wu Ming could still provide for a servant. After Gopral was completely engulfed by the black-purple teleportation gate, Silent Cry landed. "I'm sorry, Pharaoh Nitornis. I didn't manage my subordinates well." Wu Ming, who came in front of Nitornis, said to Nitornis. In any case, it could be seen from Jillian's final impact that she had the desire to kill Nitornis. Wu Ming also saw that Nitornis was ready to release her noble phantasm. If Wu Ming didn't stop her, either one of Jillian and Nitornis would leave, or both of them would leave together. After all, it was very likely that when Nitornis released her noble phantasm to take Jillian away, Jillian also took the opportunity to take Nitornis away. In short, they would die together. If that happened, there would be a rift between him and Ramses II. If he came to the other party's territory and his subordinates died together with the other party's subordinates, regardless of whether Wu Ming had malicious intentions or not, he would become enemies with the other party. Wu Ming would think of the worst-case scenario. After all, there was no harm in preparing for a rainy day. But fortunately, all of this was stopped by Wu Ming. "You're exaggerating, Sir Villo." Nitornis stood firm and shook her head. "By the way, do you know what's going on? Why did Jillian fall into such a state of madness?" Although Wu Ming knew that Jillian wasn't honest, Jillian shouldn't have fallen into madness so easily. Although it was also possible that Jillian wanted to play around and ended up screwing up. "I don't really understand." Nitornis shook her head. Immediately after, Nitornis told Wooming everything she knew. After Nitornis sent Wooming to the main hall, where Ramses II was, she left the main hall and went outside. Then, she saw Jillian teasing the Sphinx group responsible for guarding the place. Nitornis was dissatisfied and stopped Jillian with words. In the end, Jillian stopped teasing the Sphinx group and started chatting with Nitornis. Although Nitocris was rather surprised, after exchanging names with Gopral and attempting to chat with her, she found that Gopral wasn't a bad person. Thus, the two of them began to converse. Although they might develop into enemies because of their respective masters, neither Nitornis nor Jillian was worried. Once they became enemies, they would go all out. Be it Nitornis's loyalty to Ramses II or Jillian's loyalty to Wooming. They wouldn't let the two of them stop just because they had a good chat. Although it sounded cruel, that was the truth. Afterward, when they talked about the sandstorm they encountered when they first entered the desert, Nitornis said, "I did it." After that, Giliel smiled and began her attack on Nitocris. It had to be said that Nitornis was still too naive. Jillian was clearly tricking her. Jillian was rather concerned about the unkillable sandstorm. Although the Skywings were not as vengeful as the forest goblins, Jillian was not the kind of person who wouldn't get back at someone for smashing her place. Jillian attacked Nitornis, but Nitornis found it rather baffling because she didn't know what she had said wrong. However, since the other party had attacked, Nitornis would not passively take the beating. As a pharaoh, Nitornis naturally used magic and summoned servants to attack, but as mentioned before, whether it was the scarabs, mummies, or magic, they all had little effect on Jillian. Only a large creature like the Sphinx could slightly restrain Jillian. Thus, Nitornis began to summon the Sphinx frantically. Wooming knew what happened next. In other words, Jillian gradually lost her rationality in the battle. Chapter 7:15. Although she was furious that Nitocris had used the sandstorm to toy with her, she was in no hurry to kill Nitocris because she wanted to play with her. Instead, she fought with Nitocris' summoned creatures in an attempt to find joy in the slaughter. Although Nitocris was a pharaoh and had a powerful noble phantasm, if Gypril assassinated her or launched a surprise attack, Nitocris might not be able to use her noble phantasm. After all, Gypril's physical attributes were very powerful. Based on the servant panel, it was the attributes of a top-notch servant. Therefore, Gypril, who did not directly kill Nitocris, actually wanted to play with Nitocris to avenge the shame of the sandstorm. As a result, when Gypril fought with the Sphinx summoned by Nitocris, Gypril was gradually affected by Berserk to the extent that she did not even listen to Wooming's words. Although it was not clear whether this was the case or not, Wooming felt that his judgment was correct. In short, in fact, Gypril reaped what she sowed. Wooming's tone was somewhat helpless, but things had already happened, and Wooming could only smile. That, Sir Villo, Nitocris looked like she wanted to say something, but hesitated. If you have something to say, just say it. After all, this time we are in the wrong. Wooming calmly signaled Nitocris to speak her mind. Yes, Nitocris nodded. Although I am not a member of your camp, if possible, please do not punish Miss Gypril. If I understand correctly, are you pleading for her? Wooming glanced at Nitocris in surprise. Nitocris' pleading for Gypril was beyond Wooming's expectations. That's right. Miss Jillian and I hit it off quite well. I feel quite happy chatting with her. Although I don't know why Miss Jillian would suddenly attack me. I think it should be because Miss Jillian was affected by the Berserk skill. This made Wooming even more astonished. Even now, Nitocris still couldn't tell that Jillian was only pretending to chat with her. Her true goal was to get information out of her. Can I ask why? Wooming asked. Nitocris hesitated. Seeing such a Nitocris, Wooming quickly waved his hand. Of course, if it's inconvenient, you don't have to say it. However, Nitocris shook her head. There's nothing inconvenient about it. Then, as if she had made up her mind, Nitocris began to explain. Lord Varen, I'm sure you already know that I became a pharaoh because I was pushed to that position by someone else. To put it simply, I'm just a puppet. Nitocris' eyes wavered, as if she was recalling the events of her life. But even so, I'm prepared to become a pharaoh, the son of God, the king of gods. But the price is that I don't have any close friends. As she spoke, Nitornis's eyes dimmed. After being hastily pushed to the position of pharaoh, her original friends were probably gradually estranged from her because of the difference between human and God. But I still have my brother. I can chat with him in my free time and relax my tense heart. Just that alone is enough for me. Thinking of her family, Nidicle's eyes showed a trace of gentleness. But my only family member, my brother, was branded with a groundless crime. He was murdered by those who pushed me to the position of pharaoh and treated me as a puppet. Nidicle's tone carried a trace of grief and indignation. They even deliberately let me know of this news and talked about it in front of me as if they were showing off. Because she was a puppet, a bird in a cage, there was no need to avoid it. Because she was a puppet, a fish in a pond, there was no need to fear it. And because she was a puppet, something in the palm of her hand, there was no need to be vigilant. And the result was, I killed them, said Nitocris, neither sad nor happy. They never thought that I would attack them. I still remember their expressions of despair before they were drowned. Although Nitocris's words were cruel, there was no complacency on her face from her successful revenge. Because it was meaningless. Why was it meaningless? It was because my family member can't be revived. Even if I cut them into pieces, he still can't be revived. Nidicles gripped the scepter tightly, as if it was going to break. I lost my family member who understood me. I also thought that my actions of murder disqualified me from the position of pharaoh. In the end, I chose to kill myself. Nidicles finished speaking. During this time, Wuming did not say a word. Since Nidicles had spoken to this extent, Wuming more or less understood. She was willing to gamble her life for her family because her family understood her. Whether it was because they understood that Nidicles was her family or because she was Nidicles' family, it was not important. What was important was that she no longer had a close friend. After talking with Gopral for a while, Nidicles clearly felt that Gopral could understand her and could become her close friend. This was normal. After all, Nidicles had only lived for a short period of time and did not have many close friends. Moreover, after becoming a follower, she had been staying with Ramses II. To Nidicles, Ramses II was someone who required respect and loyalty, so they could not become close friends. It could be said that Gopral was the first woman other than Chaldea who could become Nidicles' close friend. It was because of this that Nidicles would cover up Chaldea's group who had only saved her life. It was also because of this that Nidicles did not use a killing move on Gopral from the start. On the other hand, the reason why Gopral didn't attack Nitornis directly was most likely because she had a good impression of her, so she decided to tease her. As for killing Nidicles later on, Wuming guessed that it was because she was under the influence of Berserk. Nidicles was prepared to use a noble artifact on Gopral in the end because she was at her wit's end. As mentioned before, if the two of them became enemies, she would definitely not hold back. Nidicles could not die yet. At the very least, she could not die in such a sullen manner. At the very least, she had to be loyal to Ramses II. As for whether or not Giliel and Nitocris had taken a liking to each other, they could only wait until Giliel woke up to find out. Although Miss Gopral had the intention to scout for information in the beginning, I could sense that she was indeed very happy during the conversation. That wasn't an act. Nitoris exonerated Gopral. If possible, please don't punish her. After saying that, Nidicles had a pleased look on her face. Wuming could only smile helplessly. Don't worry, I won't punish her. Chapter 716. I don't have the habit of punishing my subordinates, so even if you say so, I won't punish her. Wuming's words made Nitocris calm down. Thank you, Sir Villo. However, Wuming was puzzled. I remember you said that you knew that Jillian was chatting with you to get information from you, right? Nitocris nodded with a smile. Sir Villo, you can't be thinking of me as a fool, right? I'm a pharaoh after all. How can I not have some wisdom? After all, when Nitocris drowned those in power who murdered her brother, she used a scheme. In other words, actually, I'm very smart. Wuming smiled helplessly. Although he was helpless, Wuming didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It's about time. My purpose of coming here has been achieved. I'm going to leave now. He got the Holy Grail and didn't fight with Ramses II. Although Jillian had a fight with Nitocris because of her berserk state, nothing happened in the end. So Wu Ming was ready to leave. By the way, Sir Villo, I have something to report. When she heard that Wu Ming was leaving, Nitocris instantly remembered something. What's the matter? Wu Ming looked at Nitocris puzzledly. He shouldn't have any other connection with this place. It's like this. Sir Osmondes captured a knight from the Holy City not long ago. Knight? Wu Ming was stunned at first. Then he thought of something. It can't be Tristan, right? That's a knight who uses a magic bow. Well, it's really Tristan. I have to say that this guy is really unlucky. He was just sent to the desert by Wu Ming to be on standby and gather information, but he was captured not long after. However, if it was really Tristan, why couldn't Wu Ming sense Tristan's location? After all, Wu Ming was currently Tristan's temporary master. Lord Osmondes inadvertently noticed that someone was scouting for information about the terrain nearby, so he directly captured that person and imprisoned him under the pyramid, isolating him. This finally resolved Wu Ming's doubts. It turned out that the barrier had cut off his perception of Tristan. And because Tristan didn't leave, the contract between him and Wu Ming was still intact. That was why Wu Ming didn't realize that Tristan was captured. Lord Osmondes told me to hand him over to you if you want to leave. Hold on. Wu Ming suddenly spoke, interrupting Nitocris. I don't want it anymore. Let him continue to stay under the pyramid. Wu Ming's words stunned Nitornis. Why did he not want it? Thank you, Ramses II, for taking care of Tristan for me. Remember to thank him for me. I'll take my leave first. What a joke. How could Wu Ming not know what kind of person Tristan was? If he were to return to Artoria, then he would be a great help. It was better to let Tristan stay here. After Wu Ming finished speaking, the dark purple teleportation door opened. Without waiting for Nitornis to react, Wu Ming plunged into it. Then, the dark purple teleportation door closed. Okay. Only then did Nitornis react, and she nodded subconsciously. However, Wu Ming had already left. In the lower level of the pyramid, in the barrier prison, Tristan sat on the stone bed. He looked at his empty hands because his weapons were confiscated and sighed. Sigh. I'm so sad. On the ground that seemed to have been scorched by flames, the huge floating tree with crystal leaves and a scarlet trunk, a Bonnie Heim, floated in the sky. The crystal-like leaves continued to sway with the airflow in the sky, refracting the sunlight in all directions. The huge tree that was like a floating island gave off a harmless feeling under the sunlight. However, under this seemingly peaceful scene, there was a hidden killing intent. The skywing species had entered a standby state. As the existence of the skywing species home, Abani's responsibility was not small. Although Abanti usually looked harmless, that was only because the skywing species were there, so there was no need for it to do anything. Now, Abanti, who shouldered the heavy responsibility of protecting the skywing species, was in a state of high alert. In the sky above Abanti, a dark purple ripple suddenly appeared. Accompanied by the sound of chains, an angel-like figure fell. It was the unconscious Giliel. When Abani saw that the newcomer was someone he knew, some of the tiny tree trunks on his body instantly lengthened and extended, catching Jillian. Immediately after, another dark purple ripple appeared, and Wu Ming's figure appeared in the sky. Seeing that the master was loyal to had arrived, Abanti controlled many red branches to extend over. Although it knew that its master could fly, it still had to show some sincerity. Wu Ming gave Abani a lot of face, free-falling onto the red branches that Abani had extended over. Standing on Abani's branches, Wu Ming arrived on a platform on Abani's body as if he was taking an elevator. Beside him, Giliel was also placed on the ground by Abani. The scarlet branches retreated like tentacles, leaving only Wu Ming and the unconscious Giliel on the platform. Abanti, send Giliel to her room. No one responded to Wu Ming, and Abanti used its actions to prove its obedience. The platform beneath Gopral seemed to have melted, and Gopral slowly sank down. This was Abani's ability, so Wu Ming did not panic. Gilliel completely sank into the softened platform. In just a few seconds, Gilliel disappeared, and the platform returned to its original state. A very convenient ability, Wuming commented. It had to be said that the Skywings had truly made the right choice in choosing to live on Abani's body. Abani's mobile, multi-purpose aerial fortress was truly amazing. However, looking at Abanti at his feet, Wuming suddenly remembered something. I seem to have been tricked by Ramses II. It had to be said that it was Ramses II who had launched an attack on Wuming's side first. Wuming had gone this time to get back at him and take the Holy Grail. However, after busying himself for so long, Wuming ended up owing the other party a favor. Although Ramses had launched that attack to determine whether Wuming's faction had the right to exist, it was still the other party who had made the first move. Furthermore, Wuming had been blinded by the Holy Grail. Forget it. It doesn't matter. Wuming shrugged. After all, there was nothing for Ramses II to do. After dealing with the problem of Artoria, he would hand over the Holy Grail to Gadotsi. Let's go take a look at the situation of the Skywings. Abani understood, and the platform under Wuming's feet softened. Wuming's body slowly sank as if he had sunk into a swamp. Chapter 717. To be honest, ever since Wuming became Abanti's master, he had not entered Abani's body to take a look. Walking in the corridor, Wuming looked around curiously. This isn't any different from other ordinary buildings. Wuming had thought that Abani's body, which was classified as a living creature, would be closer to the style of a living creature. He did not expect it to be similar to the internal buildings of steel and stone. If there was a difference, it would be that Abani's building was extremely luxurious. Speaking of which, it seems like the Skywings' rooms don't have doors. Just as Wuming finished speaking, the corridor changed. The walls of the corridor cracked like the walls of shoddy house, and doors opened on the smooth walls. In addition, there was a small window on each door. Needless to say, this was definitely done by Abani for Wuming to make it easier for him to check the condition of the Skywings. But I can't just lie on the windows of those doors and look, can I? Wuming said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Hearing Wuming's words, almost all the doors disappeared, except for one door. Since Abanti had left this door, it must have been a signal for Wuming to go in. Without saying anything else, Wuming walked to the only door, pushed it open, and walked in. What greeted him was a monitoring room full of technology. The room was neither big nor small. It was full of modern-style floors and walls, as well as a console with a large number of buttons, keyboards, and control handles. Large, technology-like screens surrounded the room and stuck to the walls. To be honest, Wuming was stunned. Abani was clearly a moving fortress of magic, but it had created a technology-style control room for Wuming. How could Wuming not be stunned? But this is indeed much more convenient. After coming to his senses, Wuming was no longer surprised that Abanti could create such a room. According to Wuming's understanding, it seemed that the servants would gain modern knowledge when they were summoned. Although Wuming was not sure if the servants summoned in the singularity would gain modern knowledge, seeing how Abanti had so skillfully created such a technology-style room, it probably had already gained modern knowledge. I hope it's that convenient to use, Wuming said as he walked to the console. After all, Wuming was not sure if Abanti could create such a sophisticated instrument just by relying on the modern knowledge given by the summons. The whole room was quite simple. Apart from the big screen and console, there was nothing else. The console, of course, was located in the middle of the room, facing the door. Wuming walked to the back of the control panel and sat on the bright and clean sofa chair. It's quite comfortable. Wuming patted the armrests on both sides of the sofa and nodded in satisfaction. Then, turn the big screen and let me take a look. After Wuming finished speaking, Abant began to move. Buzz, one by one, the big screens changed from a dark state to a dazzling blue light. Immediately afterward, the buttons, and joysticks on the console also emitted light. Well, it looks like it. Wuming nodded. He didn't expect Abani to be able to restore this sense of technology. It was quite smart. Immediately afterward, A virtual screen generated by magic appeared in a folded state on the console in front of Wuming. Wuming was stunned, but Wuming's heart was not calm. Is that it? The big screen on the wall lit up with a blue light and nothing else was displayed. It was as if it had crashed. The device on the console emitted light only to provide a magic outlet for the magic screen, so that the magic screen could be displayed. There was no other use at all. Except for the comfortable chair Wuming was sitting in, everything else was just a fake on the outside. I should have thought of it a long time ago. Even if it grants the servant modern knowledge, how can it be possible to tell the servant about the sophisticated computer system? Silent Wonder sighed self-deprecatingly, then smiled helplessly. If the servant was given such a level of knowledge, then the servant summoning system was really terrifying. In other words, Abanti made this seemingly high-tech monitoring room, but in fact, it was just drawing a ladle according to the gourd. There was no inside of the gourd at all. There was only the ladle outside. In fact, what Abanti used was still magic, not technology. Forget it, it's fine as long as it can be used. Wuming didn't care much. He was just shocked by what Abent, a guy with a trace of natural attribute, did. Without saying anything else, Wuming looked at the control console, at the big virtual screen condensed from magic in front of him. Each virtual screen was about 3 meters long and square. The big screen was divided into countless smaller screens, and each screen showed the monitoring situation of the rooms of the Skywings. Because there were so many Skywings, these screens were stacked together. Wuming waved his hand, and Abanti knowingly helped Wuming separate the big screens. The virtual screens were spread out in front of Wuming, forming a wall. Although it looked a little dazzling, it did indeed report the situation of every Skywing to Wuming. Everyone is sleeping soundly. He quickly glanced at the Skywing species on the screen. They were all sleeping soundly. Wuming also saw Gopral on the screen. Unlike the other Skywings, she was not floating in the room, but lying on her bed. After all, the other Skywings were on standby, while she was unconscious. Although Wuming had a way to quickly wake Gopral up, but I'll just let her sleep. In any case, I'll just keep supplying her with magic, and she'll be able to recover. It was just that it would be a little slower. Aside from the Skywings, the big screen also showed the monitoring of the corridor. Looking at the monitoring, Wuming suddenly felt that something was wrong with the big screen. He seemed to have seen a black shadow flash across the corridor. He checked the big screen again, trying to find something wrong, but no matter how carefully he looked, he couldn't see anything different. Was it my imagination? Wuming frowned. No, that can't be it. It can't be your imagination. Wuming had always trusted his sixth sense, and every time he followed it, it was always correct. Wuming was sure that something had gotten into Abanti's body. Furthermore, that black shadow he had just caught gave Wuming a sense of danger. A powerful stealth ability, a strange movement technique, and something that even made Wuming feel a sense of danger. Combined with this singularity, Wuming could only think of one person. First Hassan. Wuming had just finished speaking when he saw a sword flash coming at him. Chapter 718. Wuming instinctively tried to dodge, only to realize that it was futile. I can't dodge it. Wuming was alarmed. The sword flash was clearly not fast, but Wuming had the feeling that he could not dodge it. Squelch. With a squelch, half of Wuming's arm was chopped off and blood gushed out. However, Wuming only frowned. Without saying a word, he raised his other arm and punched behind him. Boom! Along with the golden light, the fist collided with the dark and gloomy 1-meter-tall skull shield. The powerful force caused the atmosphere to tremble. At this moment, Abant also reacted. This was its body, and it did not even know that someone had snuck in. This was a great humiliation. In an instant, countless branch-like tentacles pierced towards the place where Wu Ming had attacked like sharp swords. Whoosh! The sword flashed, and Abant's branch-like tentacles were shattered one by one, as if they were dead. At this moment, the Skywings in their rooms were also awakened by the battle between Wu Ming, Abant, and the enemy. In their respective rooms, they suddenly opened their eyes. The golden pupils of the sword, and the shield instantly turned into scarlet pupils of the sword talisman. Like ghosts, the Skywings collectively passed through the illusory walls of their rooms and headed in Wuming's direction. Because of the Skywings' ability to pass through walls, the walls were just a layer of colored air to them. "Everyone stop!" Wuming yelled at the air. Wuming knew very well who the other party was. Apart from the first Hassan, Wuming could not think of anyone else who could be the Crown Assassin spirit base. Thus, the other party could not be dealt with by relying on numbers. Even if this number was supplemented by the Skywings, it would not be enough. Wuming's order caused the Skywings, who had been rushing toward Wuming, to collectively stop. Some of the Skywings had even entered Wuming's room. "Return to your rooms and wait for further orders," Wuming said as he gave his second order. Whether it was the Skywings who had already reached Wuming's room or the other Skywings who had not made it in time, they collectively bowed and left with their heads lowered. The Skywings retreated to their rooms, but they continued to stare at Wuming's room with their scarlet eyes. Although Silent Wonder was very dissatisfied that the Skywings were berserkers, he had to admit that there was a benefit to berserker servants, and that was that they were exceptionally obedient. When Wuming said, "Everyone stop," it naturally included Abendheim, so Abend did not attack again. "First Hassan, you and I have nothing to do with each other, so why are you trying to assassinate me?" Wuming said in an unfriendly tone as he looked at the shadow where Wuming had attacked. The entire room was enveloped by the light from the large screen, and only the corner behind Wuming was dark. "Do you have to be so obvious? Did you have to be so obvious?" The reason it was a shadow was because Wuming still could not see who the other party was. However, other than the mysterious first Hassan, who had such powerful stealth abilities and strength that could injure Wuming, Wuming could not think of anyone else. It was as if he had given up because he had not killed the enemy in one strike, or perhaps he had achieved his goal. The shadow in the corner dissipated, revealing a tall figure. He was over 2 meters tall and wore shabby dark armor. The armor's shoulders, elbows, knees, and even back had decorative barbs that pointed upward. He held a simple and worn-out greatsword in his right hand, and his left hand held a meter-tall shield that also had barbs. Most importantly, the other party's armor had a rather shabby cloak and a skull mask. If it was a mask, it would not be too accurate because the other party's skull mask was more like a helmet than a mask. A skull with strange horns wrapped tightly around the other party's head. Although the area near the chin was not covered by the skull, what was revealed was darkness. Only the area around the eyes had a dark blue flame that looked like a soul fire burning dimly. With his skull face alone, Wuming was sure that the other party was indeed First Hassan, and it was definitely the First Hassan. Crack, crack, crack. With a little cracking sound, the shield held by the First Hassan cracked and then shattered. The fragments turned into a black mist and entangled into the dark cloak behind the First Hassan. The First Hassan, who lost the shield in his left hand, chose to touch the tip of the great sword to the ground and press the hilt of the great sword with both hands as if he was leaning on a crutch. "Answer my question, First Hassan," Wuming repeated in a more unfriendly tone. Wuming was indeed easy to talk to, but this did not mean that Wuming would tolerate being cut by someone and losing an arm. Moreover, Wuming was not afraid of the crown servant. He had 12 incarnations. If Wuming wanted, he could make the First Hassan leave here. "The bell of thy evening has not rung, but thy destiny has deviated." An old and deep voice came from under the mask of the First Hassan. Wuming was dumbfounded. What is this? The bell of the evening did not ring. It should be saying that he should not die yet. Wuming felt like he was scolding himself, but it was the truth. Then why did you come to cut me? According to Wuming's knowledge, the First Hassan was the one who beheaded Hassan who had gone astray. Although it did not mean that the First Hassan would only attack Hassan, Wuming did not understand why the other party attacked him. The two had no interest disputes at all, and Wuming also saved the life of Hassan. Could it be that the other party was here to thank him? However, this thank you gift was really too heavy, wasn't it? Also, what does deviated destiny mean? Is it possible that there is something that needs me to do, but I didn't do it? Even if it was a reminder, why did you have to cut me directly? The first Hassan had the ability to kill the opponent instantly. Wu Ming could also feel the power of instant death from the cut, but the cut on Wu Ming did not trigger the instant death effect at all. Wu Ming's body was 100% immune to such means, but this spiritual base was not immune. In other words, the first Hassan did not want to kill him at all. The destiny of the winged otherworlder and the behemoth floating in the mortal world is different. I want to silence it on behalf of God. The first Hassan spoke again. Wu Ming frowned. Is it because the skywing species and Abani are not native residents of this world? So they were targeted by the first Hassan, and I was only forced to take a cut. Chapter 719. The Skywings and Abaniheim were not products of this planet, which meant that they were actually stowaways. As the thugs of the restraining power, the crown servants were there to deal with these stowaways. However, with the relationship between Wu Ming and the restraining power, how could the restraining power attack Wu Ming? Furthermore, the first Hassan had aimed at Wu Ming, so Wu Ming did not understand what was going on. However, after hearing the first Hassan's next words, Wu Ming understood. However, the blade has already been unsheathed. There is no second strike. To put it simply, the first Hassan had let go of the Skywings and Abaniheim. So, in other words, Wu Ming had taken the punishment on behalf of the Skywings and Aban Wu Ming, who had figured it out, sighed, and the anger in his heart dissipated. Now, the world was in a state of burning humanity, and the restraining power, Alea, was definitely not in a good state. The first Hassan might have been sent out to help Chaldea save humanity. The first Hassan's mission was to find out about the abnormalities, and the Skywings and Abani, as stowaways, were definitely one of the abnormalities, which was the so-called violation of destiny. Destiny was an established fact. Originally, there were no such conspicuous existences like Abanti and the Skywings in history, so this was considered a violation of destiny. Take the Lionheart King, who is currently in the Holy City, as an example. She had replaced the Lionheart King to rule the Holy City, which was considered a change of fate and could also be considered as taking over the Lionheart King's destiny. Since Wu Ming's side was considered to have gone against the will of the heavens, then wouldn't Ramses II's side also be considered to have gone against the will of the heavens? That was very likely. Wu Ming recalled some details about Ramses II. When Ramses II and Wu Ming were talking, Ramses II had been holding his head, and his neck gave Wu Ming a feeling that something was wrong. He did not think much of it first, but now that he thought about it, Wu Ming felt that something was wrong. Could it be that Ramses II had already been beheaded by the first Hassan, and it was even his head? After seeing the first Hassan's stealth and assassination ability, Wu Ming had no doubt that he could successfully infiltrate Ramses II's temple. The reason why Ramses II was not dead was probably due to the temple's blessing. The lunar residence, in that world, Wu Ming was Wu Ming's temple. Although the size of the temple wasn't large, Wu Ming couldn't be killed if he was inside the temple, just like how Ramses II couldn't be killed in his own temple. With this series of speculations, Wu Ming was now more and more suspicious of Ramses II, wondering if he had also been beheaded by the first Hassan. Ramses II did not die because of the temple, but why was Wu Ming fine after being beheaded by the first Hassan without the temple? Wu Ming's doubts were almost solved. It stood to reason that Wu Ming's spiritual base did not have the instant immunity effect of his root of origin. Even if his arm was cut off from the point of instant death, he would die as long as he touched it. Therefore, Wu Ming should have left by now. But Wu Ming was fine. Wu Ming looked at his severed arm. The severed arm had turned into magic power and dissipated, and the wound on Wu Ming's severed arm had stopped bleeding, but that was not the point. The point was that Wu Ming did not feel any aura of death on his severed arm. Wu Ming could even use magic power to condense a new arm. Let's do it. Wu Ming thought so, and magic power surged at the severed arm. In just a few seconds, a new arm reappeared. Sure enough, looking at his newly grown arm, Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan, who was surrounded by shadows. Is it the decision of the restraining power or your own will? Wu Ming looked at the first Hassan. Wu Ming's question was very simple. Did the restraining power give the order to be merciful, or did the first Hassan choose not to let Wu Ming leave? This is the instruction of the evening bell, and also my will. The instruction of the evening bell was definitely the restraining power. That was the difference. Ramses II's head was cut off. Thinking about it, the first Hassan did not use the instant death power when he attacked Ramses II. There were many ways to make a servant leave, such as lack of magic power, master leaving, shattering the heart, spirit core, and head, and so on. Generally speaking, as long as the servant's head was gone, even if the spirit core was intact, they would leave unless they had special abilities. This was the case for Ramses II. The great shrine of Ramses II allowed him to survive after his head was cut off and did not leave. However, this was also thanks to the first Hassan not using the instant death power, which allowed Ramses II to have the opportunity to use the great shrine to extend his life. The first Hassan, who believed in the saying, "Once the sword is out of the scabbard, there is no second sword," did not attack Ramses II again. On the other hand, Wu Ming remembered clearly that the first Hassan's attack was on his body. Because Wu Ming dodged, it led to Wu Ming's arm being cut off. Although cutting off the body was not much better than cutting off the head, one must know that compared to other parts of the body, it was the most difficult place to cut off. After all, the connection point between the arm, head, and other parts of the body was very small, so the first Hassan was actually just cutting off the head. He actually did not expect that Wu Ming could detect his attack and avoid it. Worthy of the name of the legendary dragon. The first Hassan thought so in his heart. On the other hand, Wu Ming was thinking, sure enough, it's good to have someone above you. Wu Ming silently nodded in his heart. In that case, I won't hold you responsible for trying to assassinate me. First Hassan, Wu Ming calmly said. Wu Ming had gotten the upper hand this time. The first Hassan definitely had not snuck in here for a while. If he had attacked Abant and the Sky Wings while Wu Ming was looking for Ramses II, they felt that there was no chance of survival and would have left. According to what the first Hassan had said, it was the first Hassan who had chosen to wait for Wu Ming to arrive before stabbing Wu Ming and letting go of the Sky Wings and Abant. Thinking about it this way, Wu Ming seemed to have to thank the first Hassan. This was too awkward. Even if the first Hassan had given Wu Ming face and only cut him once, having to say thank you after being cut was not something Wu Ming could do. As if seeing Wu Ming's concerns, the first Hassan directly spoke. I will remember in my heart that thou hast saved smoky drunk Hassan. Wu Ming was stunned. This was really a thank you gift. Although this thank you gift was a little too much for Wu Ming to accept. I have one more thing, the first Hassan suddenly said. Chapter 720. The silver arm can't save the white man. You still need to save him. Wu Ming was taken aback, then frowned. White man? Silver arm? There was no doubt that these two were referring to two different people. As for the pure white man, Wu Ming could still guess who it was. It was the pure white Lion King who now occupied the holy city, Artoria Pendragon. It wasn't Wu Ming who thought so. Ramses II also called the Lion King Artoria, who is currently in the holy city that way. But who was the silver arm? Wu Ming didn't remember the silver arm among the people he knew, or was it someone Artoria knew? The people related to Artoria were only those, the Knights of the Round Table, Merlin, Morgan Le Fay, and so on. But Wu Ming, as the person who accompanied Artoria for most of her life, was naturally familiar with the people Artoria was familiar with. But none of these people were related to the silver arm. Silver arm. 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 Wait. Wu Ming suddenly thought of something. From the information obtained by Wu Ming so far, only 3 Knights of the Round Table did not respond to Artoria's summon. Villo the Ransword, Galahad, and Bedivere. Villo was Wu Ming himself, so it was normal that he couldn't be summoned. Galahad was attached to Matthew, so naturally, he couldn't respond to the summon. Bedivere, who was quite loyal to Artoria, also didn't respond to Artoria's summon, which was undoubtedly a big doubt. And Bedivere had a big characteristic as a Knight of the Round Table. He had a broken arm. Among the Knights of the Round Table, only Bedivere had a relationship with the arm. And when he was in the Uruk Singularity, Wu Ming once talked with Merlin. Through the conversation, Wuming learned that Merlin was actually very clear about the sixth singularity where Wuming was now. After all, he had clairvoyance, and the fact that Artoria was in this singularity was revealed by Merlin. Otherwise, Wuming wouldn't know that Artoria was here. Still through the conversation, Wuming vaguely learned from Merlin that Merlin was not doing nothing. He had foreshadowed something. As for what the foreshadowing was, unfortunately, Merlin either changed the topic or shook his head mysteriously and refused to say it. Maybe Bedivere was that foreshadowing. But what the truth was, he still had to wait until the truth came out. After ending his inner thoughts, Wuming looked at the first Hassan, who was standing in the same place and leaning on his greatsword like a crutch. The first Hassan came to tell me all this. I will remember it in my heart. I will consider going to the holy city again. Wuming didn't give up the idea of going to the holy city to stop Artoria. Because of the oath, Wuming chose to temporarily leave the holy city and go to the desert to seize the Holy Grail. Fortunately, he met Gadatsi and her party on the way. As a result, his goal of helping Gadatsi repair the singularity as soon as possible was half completed. One was to find Gadatsi, and the other was to complete the goal. The former had been completed, and the latter was almost done. After all, Wuming had already taken the Holy Grail back. After Gadatsi accompanied Matthew to solve Galahad's wish, Wuming would give the Holy Grail to Chaldea and begin to repair the singularity. But after knowing that Artoria seemed to be hiding something from Wuming, coupled with the fact that the first Hassan personally came to remind him, Wuming decided to stay in this singularity for a while. Don't say too much. This is my thanks. The first Hassan responded to Wuming in a brief and simple tone, as if saying goodbye. Then, accompanied by a black fog, the first Hassan disappeared. At the same time, the dark and gloomy feeling in the room also disappeared. The eyes of every skywing species in their room also changed from scarlet eyes of sword runes to golden eyes of sword and shield. All the skywing species calmed down. Abent, who used the entire floating tree as his body, also relaxed. Wuming could clearly feel that Abent's magic power had stabilized a lot. As expected of the Hassan of the Hassans, the assassin of the assassins, with the existence of the crown's spiritual base, Wuming could not help but exclaim. To be honest, just this aura that even Wuming could not detect was enough to show how powerful the first Hassan was. However, if Ramses II were to see this scene, he would probably change his opinion of Wuming. Look at Wuming. He could even vaguely detect the crown assassin and was able to dodge the opponent's attack. Although he did not dodge, at least he moved. Unlike him, he did not even know that his head had been chopped off. If not for the first Hassan showing himself at the end, Ramses II probably would not have known who had attacked him. If not for the fact that Wuming had met Ramses II and had a little understanding of him, Wuming might have attributed Ramses' obedience to fear after being cut by the first Hassan. However, it was precisely because Wuming had met Ramses II and understood his character that he did not think so. How could a guy like Gilgamesh know how to write the word fear? This king-like courage was what Wuming appreciated. Just as Wuming was thinking about whether to immediately go to the holy city, the first Hassan's voice suddenly came from a void. I have cut off thy foreign air, and the armor of refutation shall return. This was undoubtedly the divine ability of the first Hassan. Having seen it before, Wuming was not frightened and instead nodded in understanding. Instead, it was the skywing species and Abant who were startled by the sudden turn of events from the first Hassan and collectively entered battle mode. This made them smile helplessly and gratifyingly. They were indeed no match for the first Hassan, but for the safety of their master, they would still stand up. The loyalty of the skywing species was vividly displayed. Previously, when Wuming's arm was cut off by the first Hassan, almost all the skywings woke up from their standby slumber and rushed toward Wuming. The reason it was almost was because Jillian did not come. Logically speaking, although Jillian would definitely be the first to come in such a situation, there was no sign of Jillian this time. In truth, it was mainly because Jillian was still in a deep slumber and recovering from the previous incident. It was similar to a protective device in a human body. Jillian was severely lacking in magic power and was recovering, so she might not be able to wake up even if she wanted to. It was the same principle as how humans would fall into a coma after losing large amounts of blood. Not bothering with Jillian, Wu-Ming walked out of the room. Now that all the Skywings were awake, he had to go and comfort them so they could sleep. Otherwise, even if they were in a non-combat state, Wu-Ming was afraid that their berserk state would devour their rationality. However, when he thought about the number of Skywings, Wu-Ming felt his stomach ache. I'll just treat it as training. Chapter 721. The Skywings had fallen asleep, but it was not Wu-Ming who pacified them one by one. After all, this was a Bonthi's body, and with a Bonthi's help, Wu-Ming had successfully experienced what it was like to be a leader. A Bonthi sent a collective message to the Skywings to pacify them. However, this time, the Skywings were more like sleep than standby. Because it was Wu-Ming who had personally gone to comfort the Skywings, he had asked them to lie down on the bed like ordinary girls instead of floating in the air and waiting for an opportunity. Although the Skywings did not quite understand this behavior, it was still an order from their master, so they still obeyed. Lying on the bed, the Skywings entered a standby state, but to an outsider, they really did look like they were asleep. Back in the monitoring room, Wu-Ming sat on the sofa and browsed through a large magic screen in front of him. The screen displayed the basic data of the Skywings. Although a Bonthi did not really have modern technological knowledge, its magical knowledge was pretty good. Thus, it displayed the basic data of the Skywings in the form of a magic screen to Wu-Ming. Although as the master of these tens of thousands of Skywings, Wu-Ming could see the information of their servants, Wu-Ming could not look at every Skywing one by one. With the idea of slacking off, when the Skywings were summoned, Wu-Ming only looked at their ranks. The information that a Bonthi had prepared for Wu-Ming was a great help to Wu-Ming. Because the information of ordinary Skywing Ray servants was the same, Abent collected the information of those Skywing Ray servants into a sample and took it out. Unless it was a Skywing with a special skill, the information would not be listed separately. Thus, the screen in front of Wu-Ming only had the information of a few servants. After browsing for some time, Wu-Ming turned off the virtual screen in front of him and leaned back on the sofa. He crossed one hand and rubbed his forehead with the other. Sure enough, Berserker's spirit base has too much of an effect on the Skywings. According to the information provided by a Bonthi, the Skywings summoned by Berserker had an EX Berserker rank. What did an EX Berserker mean? Either they were crazy to the extreme and could communicate with others, or they could not communicate at all, not even with their master. One was the extreme of the positive side, and the other was the extreme of the negative side. It was clear that the Skywings had the extreme of the negative side. To put it simply, if the battle went on for a little longer, the Skywings might not be able to control themselves, just like Gopril. There was even a high chance that they would break from their master's control, which meant that they might break free from Wu-Ming's control or not listen to him. As a result, the Skywing species became expendable, because once they were used, they would lose control. This was something Wu-Ming didn't want to see. Fortunately, Azrael was different from the other Skywings. As the commander of the Skywings, Azrael had the ability to resist Berserk. Thus, Wu-Ming did not have to worry that Azrael would go Berserk over at Gadatsi's place. However, the other Skywings were not so lucky. According to the information provided by the servants, the Skywings that had gone Berserk were of little value. In that case, the Skywings can't move freely, Wu-Ming muttered to himself. However, as the original individual, Azrael, and the foreign individual, Gopril, could still move. Azrael had a special skill, which allowed her to move freely. As for Gopril, Wu-Ming decided that once she woke up, he would have her follow him. With Wu-Ming by his side, Wu-Ming did not feel that Gopril would go out of control. Wu-Ming could stop Gopril the moment he saw her lose her rationality. In the worst-case scenario, he could use Annihilation Lock to restrain her again. The reason why he did not bring the other Skywings was that Gopril also had a special skill. As the strongest foreign individual, Gopril had a skill that greatly strengthened her damage. In other words, Gopril's Sky Strike was much stronger than the other Sky Strikes of the other Sky Wings in terms of explosion range, power, and release speed. In fact, because of the skill, Gopril's mana consumption was much lower than the other Sky Wings. Facing an existence like Gopril, Wuming had no reason not to bring her along. This reason also explained why Wuming had chosen to have Gopril follow him. It was not because she was a foreign individual and had special privileges, but because she had a special skill. Because she was a foreign individual, she was powerful. And because she was powerful, her character was also extraordinary. It was precisely because of her extraordinary character that she had a special skill that was different from the other Skywings. Servants were the clones of heroic spirits, and heroic spirits were a kind of spiritual existence that was a combination of the human spirit and historical legends. This meant that the abilities of heroic spirits did not only rely on their own abilities, but also their inheritance. For example, take a servant that Wuming had once met, the Assyrian Empress Semiramis. The noble phantasm she used in Tuliphas was the Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble phantasm that was sublimated from the essence of the Hanging Garden, a miracle building that had disappeared. The Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, was not actually created by Semiramis. Its actual creator was actually Nebuchadnezzar II. It was precisely because of this that it was called the Hanging Garden of Babylon. It could be said that the Hanging Garden of Babylon had nothing to do with her, but because it was rumored in later generations that she had created the Hanging Garden of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world, the Hanging Garden of Babylon, was combined with Semiramis. The Vain Garden of Babylon, Hanging Garden of Babylon, a noble artifact, came into being. The Skywings had not died, were not humans, and had no connection with the human spirit, but they had legends. Just like how Wuming had left behind legends in history and obtained a different identity as a servant, the Skywings also had stories in other worlds. Since they had stories, they naturally had the possibility of becoming heroic spirits. And Wuming had cheated by summoning the Skywings. So, some of their skills or noble artifacts would naturally change because of what they had done in their own world. Azrael and Gopril were examples. Since that's the case, I'll just use the other Skywings as my trump cards. After that, Wuming put down the hand that was rubbing his eyebrows and opened his eyes. Immediately after, Wuming casually waved his hand, and golden ripples spread out around Wuming. A silver-white chain with a dark purple aura extended out of the golden ripples. Chapter 722. This was the chain that Wuming had used to subdue the Berserk Gopril. Its name was Annihilation Lock. Wuming looked at the chain that resembled a heaven lock, but was no longer a heaven lock. His heart was filled with all sorts of emotions. Wuming stroked the Annihilation Lock, and the Annihilation Lock seemed to have a mind of its own. Because of Wuming's touch, it flickered with a faint purple light. I didn't expect you to turn a fake into a real noble artifact. That's right. The Annihilation Lock in Wuming's hand had already become a noble artifact. It was not wrong to call it a noble artifact. Wuming had added his own authority to the chain. Although it was a weakened authority, the authority of a god was still not to be underestimated. When Wuming sent Gopril back, he discovered that the pseudo-heaven lock, which had absorbed one of Wuming's weakened authority, had been upgraded to the Annihilation Lock, which was a noble artifact. The Annihilation Lock was no longer a fake that would dissipate due to the evaporation of magic power. Instead, it had become a genuine noble artifact that would not wear out even after 1,000 years. The danger of this singularity is beyond my expectations, Wuming said calmly. To find help, Wuming had used his dependent incarnation. As there was no effective way to subdue Gopril, Wuming had deposited the authority of the Annihilation Incarnation into the pseudo-heaven lock, so that the chain that he had casually created could bind the Berserk Gopril. And just now, Wuming had also used his giant incarnation. As for when he used it, it was when Wuming had punched the first Hassan. At that time, Wuming defined the first Hassan as an enemy, and an enemy who had cut off on his arms. Wuming did not dare to be careless. Therefore, Wuming directly used Giant Incarnation, gathered the power of Giant into his fist and punched at First Hassan. However, Wu Ming was surprised that First Hassan's shield was able to block his attack, as expected of a crowned servant. Even though the assassin class was generally considered the weakest among the 7 classes, the assassin class was not inferior to the saber class, which was generally considered to be the best class. The other saber servants were slightly inferior to the First Hassan. However, Wu Ming was not weak either. The giant incarnation's attack directly shattered the First Hassan's shield. That was the weapon of a crowned servant, and it was not something that could be broken by just anyone. Just like the First Hassan's simple and unadorned greatsword that looked a little damaged and had become unsharp, and the cloak behind the First Hassan that looked like a ragged cloth. Both of them were not as weak as they looked on the surface. The greatsword that was constantly infused with the faith of the First Hassan had reached a level where it was undamaged, and it even had an instant death effect. The broken cloak was also quite powerful. Not only could it set off a sandstorm that was enough to cover the sun, but it also had a powerful defensive ability that was not weaker than the First Hassan's shield. Therefore, Wu Ming was able to break the First Hassan's shield. After all, in Wu Ming's opinion, the body of a servant was still too weak, unless he could also have a crowned spiritual base. However, the crowned spiritual base was created by suppression. Wu Ming did not need to submit to someone who was destined to be weaker than him, even if the other party was good to him. Anyway, when Wu Ming found his body, Wu Ming did not need to be a yes man anymore. If everything went well, maybe after solving this singularity, Wu Ming could find his body before Gadatsi and others went to Uruk. Then, he could directly solve the singularity of the Uruk and kill Gidia. He had already seen Gidia's means, and he also forced the other party to detonate the black mud on the outer layer of each world to choose to severely injure Wu Ming. Gidia must have also been injured, otherwise he would not let Wu Ming mess around in this singularity. Gidia, who also saw Wu Ming's power, was really vigilant against Wu Ming. Since Wu Ming had already done so many things in the singularity and no one stopped him, it was obvious that Gidia did not pay attention to this singularity. In Gidia's view, even with the help of Wu Ming, Chaldea could repair these burned residues, and it would have no impact on the result. To be more ruthless, even if the burn of humanity was rewritten and the burn of humanity was successfully restored by Chaldea, it would have no impact on Gidia. The reason was very clear to Wu Ming, because Gidia's vision or ambition was no longer here. Gidia, who had come into contact with the black mud, had long changed his target to other worlds, a wider sea of stars. Although Wu Ming did not know what Gidia's original purpose was, Wu Ming knew that Gidia's purpose had changed from the original goal to go into other worlds. This was like a person's original plan was to take a rocket to the moon that was suitable for him. But before taking off, he found a more habitable planet, Mars. Then, using the existing fuel, changing the route, and going to Mars wasn't impossible, right? As for the residues of the fuel, at this point, that kind of thing was no longer necessary for that person to pay attention to. But for Gidia, Wu Ming, this bomb still needed to be paid attention to. And for Wu Ming, this hidden danger, Gidia, also needed to be paid attention to. Although Wu Ming was confident that the next time he fought with Gidia, Gidia might also have the same confidence. After all, both sides understood each other after fighting once, so Gidia might also have a way to deal with Wu Ming. But that was all in the future. From the current situation, Wu Ming and Gidia wouldn't meet for a while, and Wu Ming didn't have to worry about Gidia coming out to cause trouble. Closing his eyes, Wu Ming went deep into his inner world. A huge stone plate appeared in Wu Ming's heart. There were 12 small stone plates on the large stone plate. The small stone plates were placed in the 12 o'clock direction like a scale, and 3 small stone plates were in a completely dim, petrified grayish-white state. They were the giant incarnation at 2 o'clock, the annihilation incarnation at 5 o'clock, and the dependent incarnation at 8 o'clock. These 3 incarnations have been used by Wu Ming, and Wu Ming could only use the remaining 9 incarnations. But Wu Ming didn't regret it. After all, good steel should be used on the blade. After that, Wuming left the inner world and opened his eyes. The next thing he needed to think about was Artoria. Chapter 723. Whether it was from Ramses II or the first Hassan, Wuming learned one thing. That was, Artoria's change was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. There must be more to it than meets the eye. And according to the first Hassan's words of, "I need thy rescue," Artoria's current state was not good. Although Wuming seemed to have a conflict with Artoria, Wuming could not sit still once something related to Artoria appeared. The feelings that he had gained from being with her for most of his life were not something that could be abandoned just because of a quarrel. If anyone thought that this feeling could be easily abandoned, then they had underestimated the bond between Wuming and Artoria. If I have a conflict with her and bully her until she cries, that's fine. But if you bully her until she cries, then I'm sorry, but you're done for. You'll die a horrible death, the kind that doesn't even leave behind a trace. Artoria was that she, and Wuming was that I. When it came to Artoria, Wuming would never give in, not even half a step. Wuming estimated that this matter might not have much to do with the Magus King, but the singularity was indeed caused by the Magus King in the beginning. And Wuming could not find trouble with the Magus King at the moment, so he could only take the right approach. Calculating the time, Tachika and the others should have arrived at the Holy City by now, Wuming thought. He decided to go to the Holy City first to meet up with Gadatsi and the others. But right now, Gopril, who was in a coma, had yet to wake up. Wuming did not dare to let her move freely, and restricting her movements was not appropriate either. So Wuming decided to wait until Gopril woke up. Of course, Wuming could also choose to heal Gopril and take the initiative to wake her up. But because Wuming wanted to punish Gopril, he chose to let her recover on her own. However, things were different now. Wuming had to hurry. With that in mind, Wuming stood up from the sofa and walked out of the room. Abbott was quite perceptive. He took the initiative to open a door on the wall not far away. If he was not mistaken, that door should be Jillian's room. Thinking so, Wuming walked to the front of Gypsy's door and politely knocked on the door. However, how could the unconscious Gopril possibly respond to Wuming? Wuming knocking on the door was just a mischievous act. After knocking on the door, Wuming pushed the door open and entered. His actions were rather smooth, and from this, it could be confirmed that Wuming had no intention of entering the room with Gopril's permission. Sometimes pleasure, or bad taste, was just that simple. Wuming subconsciously looked around when he entered Gopril's room. A room that looked no different from the other Skywings entered Wuming's eyes. The plain walls, the plain bed, and the plain table serve as a foil to the angelic girl's beauty and purity. Gopril was like a sleeping beauty, quietly lying on her simple and unadorned bed. The girl's wings, which were filled with pure white feathers, extended from her back to her front, gently covering her thighs and abdomen like a quilt. The girl's eyes were closed, and her beautiful face was exposed to the air. The girl's hands were crossed and placed above her abdomen and below her chest. Her chest rose and fell as if she was having a sweet dream. Wuming, who was immersed in the picture of Sleeping Beauty, sighed. Afterward, Wuming walked over to the bed and sat down. She's clearly in the posture of a slender girl, so why is she a combat weapon? Could it be that Artemis has some sort of special fetish? Wuming jokingly muttered to himself. Looking at her slender body, no one would have imagined that such a girl could erupt with destructive power. She's beautiful on the outside. If only the hearts of Skywings could be as beautiful as a girl's. Wuming sighed. Beautiful things had a beautiful interior, and this was something that every normal person yearned for. However, the hearts of Skywing girls were not as beautiful as they looked. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were bloodthirsty. They were combat weapons, and they were weapons that were originally created with the goal of killing gods. Moreover, for some reason, Skywing girls had an interest in collecting heads. This meant that Skywing girls were not suited for human life. It was a good thing that Wuming did not require them to completely integrate into human life. Not being able to fight at will was akin to hell for them. Wu Ming understood the principle that one's temperament had to be changed bit by bit. When things reach an extreme, they could only move in the opposite direction. It was precisely because of this that Wu Ming had summoned the Skywing girls to help at this particular point. Although he did not know how much time had passed in their world, they must be feeling rather uncomfortable because they could not fight as they wished. In that case, he would let them release some pressure. Not only that, but their arrival could also help Wu Ming. This was a plan that could kill two birds with one stone. It was a sure win. However, who would have thought that these Skywings would be summoned as berserkers? Their adaptability to the berserker class allowed the Skywing girls to reach the highest level of berserk. Moreover, because it was not a normal summon, this level of berserk gave them a chance to break away from their master's orders. The plan to let the Skywings release the pressure in their hearts had failed because the Skywings were too prone to losing their minds in their current state. The plan to let the Skywings help also failed because the Skywings, who were prone to losing their minds, had no way of helping Wu Ming. Wu Ming even wondered if he had hidden his luck. This was simply a case of misfortune never coming singly. Wait a minute. Wu Ming looked at Gopril's beautiful face and suddenly realized something. If I use Vitality Incarnation, can I suppress Gopril's berserk? Yes, Wu Ming suddenly thought of his own authority. Since Wu Ming's origin dragon became stronger after the baptism of origin, Wu Ming hardly used Vitality Incarnation. The only time he used it recently was to restore the life of No Name. The reason why he did not use this incarnation was very simple. It was just too useless. Vitality Incarnation could provide Wu Ming with spring-like vitality. Not only could it recover injuries and mana, but could also resist negative effects such as curses. However, after going through the origin baptism, Silent Dragon's recovery ability wasn't weak. Injuries and mana could be recovered quickly, and the origin dragon's body was also immune to negative effects. Therefore, Wu Ming basically did not use Vitality Incarnation. So, since Wu Ming could not use it, could this incarnation work on a servant who had fallen into berserk? Chapter 724. Although berserk could increase ability value, berserk also had a negative effect on the servant. So, if he injected Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's body, would she be able to avoid the negative effects of berserk? Of course, Wu Ming did not expect Jillian to enjoy the ability value increase from berserk after she successfully maintained her rationality, as long as her rationality was no longer affected by berserk. Wu Ming originally wanted to let the primitive Skywings help him, and he did not want to increase their ability value by much. After all, the price of increasing ability value was losing rationality, so it was better not to increase it. With that in mind, Wu Ming grabbed Jillian's soft body and closed his eyes. Wu Ming began to try to give the authority of Vitality Incarnation to Jillian. After all, Wu Ming had never tried to give authority to a servant. The situation when Wu Ming used Dependent Incarnation, Annihilation Incarnation, and Giant Incarnation was completely different from the current situation. When Wu Ming used the Dependent Incarnation, he used the power of the Dependent as a medium like a holy relic into the summoning circle. When Wu Ming used the Annihilation Incarnation, he added the power of Annihilation into the process of creating the pseudo-heavenly lock. When he used the Giant's power, he simply used it. Now, Wu Ming needed to instill the authority of Vitality Incarnation into Jillian's spirit base in an attempt to change the berserk effect of Jillian's berserker class. Wu Ming had experienced using his authority on a servant, but Wu Ming had never experienced using authority on a servant. Because he did not have any experience, Wu Ming could only fumble around on his own. Specks of phosphorescent magic power danced around Wu Ming's body, and the magic power seemed to have a life of its own as it surrounded Jillian. Then, Wu Ming began to chant. The one with the supreme divine power of the guardian, the protection of the god, the abomination of the devil. Nothing can get close to her, surging like a fountain of vitality. As she chanted, the surrounding phosphorescent light shone brightly. The originally star-like mana turned into a mass of mana, dancing around Jillian. That was Wu Ming's authority, the embodiment of Wu Ming's vitality. Grant the world equal protection. The moment the last sentence was chanted, the manosphere representing Wu Ming's vitality incarnation instantly fused with Gopril's body. A faint radiance was emitted from Jillian's body, and Wu Ming, who was holding Jillian's hand, could clearly feel that Jillian's mana was rapidly recovering. This meant that success. There was no surprise, no joy, as if it was a matter of course. Wu Ming said indifferently, no matter what, it was still Wu Ming's own authority. If he couldn't control it himself, then who could he count on? For Wu Ming, it was unexpected but reasonable. Along with the rapid recovery of her mana, Jillian, who was lying on the bed, slowly opened her eyes. Jillian spoke subconsciously, somewhat puzzled. Although Jillian gave off a sleepy feeling, Wu Ming knew that this was the aftereffect of Jillian's madness. How do you feel, Jillian? Wu Ming asked with concern. Master. Jillian, who heard Wu Ming's words, was obviously shocked. After coming back to her senses, Jillian saw Wu Ming holding her hand and looking at her with a face full of concern. She responded shyly to Wu Ming. Master is really concerned about me. Could it be that Master wants to do something perverted to me? If it's Master, sure. Jillian's answer instantly made Wu Ming raise his brows. Then, Wu Ming silently raised his fist. Bang! After a short while, Wu Ming sat on Jillian's bed with his legs crossed, while Jillian stood in front of Wu Ming with a smile on her face. It seemed that there was no problem at all. Of course, that was if one ignored the bump on Jillian's head. What do you feel, Jillian? Wu Ming crossed his arms and repeated his previous question. Jillian, who had learned her lesson, naturally didn't tease Wu Ming anymore. Instead, she began to answer seriously. Yes, although I don't know what happened, my body seems to have endless energy. Jillian wasn't an idiot. Instead, she was quite smart. Naturally, Jillian remembered what had happened before she lost consciousness. Combined with her own berserk EX, Jillian naturally deduced that she had lost her rationality and went berserk because of that skill. Although Wu Ming didn't say it explicitly, the reason why she could wake up without any discomfort was probably related to her master. You don't have the urge to kill like crazy anymore? Wu Ming asked. Jillian shook her head and said helplessly and playfully, I'm a Skywing after all. Of course, I still want to kill. Wu Ming glared at Jillian, and she immediately became obedient. But the feeling of wanting to kill can be controlled, just like in my original world. Jillian touched the bump on her head with some lingering fear. Her master's beating really hurt. Afterward, Jillian propped up her other arm with one hand, and the arm that was propped up extended a finger to her chin as she spoke again, puzzled. Not only that, I realized that compared to before, I'm calmer, as if the urge has been eliminated, right? Wu Ming answered for Jillian in advance. Yes, that's right. That's it. Not only that, even if I'm angry, I can only feel it a little. My anger seems to have been soothed by something. Gil Lyre sighed. This feeling was a little uncomfortable for her. It was like having a hot-tempered friend, but one day he suddenly became not hot-tempered, and he became very calm. Not to mention the people who knew him. Even he himself was surprised and uncomfortable with his current personality. However, Jillian's answer made Wu Ming close his eyes and nod. It seems that the authority is in effect. Because the effect of Vitality Incarnation was still active, whenever Jillian had negative emotions such as rage and killing, Vitality Incarnation would purify them. But after all, it was a weakened version of Authority Incarnation, and it didn't affect Wu Ming himself, so it might not work completely on Jillian. However, there was one thing that was certain. Jillian would no longer be affected by Berserk. Chapter 725. Wu Ming told Jillian what he had done to Jillian. Then, Jillian knelt down on one knee in shock. Lord Wu Ming, please forgive me for being blunt, but your gift is too precious. After knowing that Wu Ming had bestowed her with God's authority by slaying a god, she immediately became very serious. Although Gopril usually looked very playful, that was just her appearance. Every Skywing was serious and bloodthirsty, and Gopril was no exception. Once something serious happened, Gopral would become serious, just like now. Even Gopral's address for Wuming changed from Master to Lord Wuming because she became serious. Is that what you think, Gopral? Wuming smiled helplessly and shook his head. But I think it's a good deal. A dispensable authority incarnation in exchange for a rational helper. No matter how Wuming thought about it, he was the one who profited. Lord Wuming, I can feel the power of authority in my body. Gopral looked into Wuming's eyes. Even if I've been emitting magic power, the magic power in my body hasn't decreased in the slightest, and it's still full. That was the effect of the authority Wuming bestowed on Gopral. Not only that, but I also feel the surging vitality in my body all the time, as if it's about to break out of my body. That was naturally the effect of vitality incarnation. The endless vitality could quickly replenish and heal injuries. Gopral estimated that even if she was seriously injured, she would not need to go to the repair device to recover. In just a few minutes, the serious injury would disappear, and she would recover to her peak strength. Through these visible effects, Gopral also understood how powerful this power was. It was too wasteful to give such power to her. If Wuming kept it, it could be used as a trump card. Therefore, this subordinate believes that for such a precious authority, you should keep it instead of giving it to this subordinate. I don't agree with you, Gopral. Wuming gave Gopral a negative opinion. It's a real waste not to use the authority because it's precious and you're afraid of wasting it. Wuming's words made Gopral stunned, but it was not without reason. Even if something was precious, it had a use. If you chose not to use it because it was precious and kept it for safekeeping, then that item would definitely be shamed. Just like money, no matter how much money you earned, if you didn't use it, you would still be a pile of dirt after you died. To put it simply, Wu Ming was a person who believed in making the best use of everything. He would not use something because it was too precious. Of course, this was not to say that Wu Ming was a fool. Since Wu Ming chose to use it, there would naturally be benefits to be gained. Letting Gopral regain her consciousness was undoubtedly beneficial to Wu Ming's current situation. Compared to Wu Ming not knowing if he could use the vitality incarnation, it was better to give it to Gopral. Having decided to use the other Sky Wings as Joker cards, Wu Ming did not choose to use the vitality incarnation on them, and instead used it on Gopral alone. Apart from this, Wu Ming could not guarantee that the vitality incarnation on the Sky Wings would be able to suppress Berserk transformation. Therefore, using it on the strongest Skywing life form, Gopral was the best decision. After all, the saying quality, not quantity, made sense. So, Gopral, if you feel afraid and guilty about having the authority of a god, then do your best to fight for me. What would he do if he felt guilty? He just had to make it seem like he deserved it. The best way was to make military contributions. Wu Ming's words made Gopral's eyes light up. Gopral instantly perked up and replied to Wu Ming with a victorious smile. Yes, the Skywing alien Gilial is determined to sweep away all the enemies in your path for you, my lord. Victory for you. At this moment, Gopral seemed to have found her purpose in that war that had lasted for who knew how long. For my lord's victory, I won't hesitate to die. Get ready, Gopral. We'll go to the holy city in a moment, Wu Ming said and walked toward the door. He did not forget that this was Gopral's room. Yes. Hearing Gopral's response, Wu Ming pushed the door open and went out. After closing the door, Wu Ming let out a long sigh of relief. Gopral is really giving me a headache, Wu Ming said as he walked toward the surveillance room that a bond had opened for him. But it's better to have a headache than to have no one to deal with her, Wu Ming said and walked into the surveillance room. Wu Ming sat on the familiar sofa and looked at the virtual surveillance screen in front of him. Wu Ming shouted to Abant. Abant, can you turn on the surveillance around you? There were no words, only the changes on the virtual screen in front of Wu Ming. The virtual screen no longer showed the Sky Wings, but the barren land and withered branches that had lost all life, as well as the clear sky with a large halo. There is no doubt that Abant was like a moving fortress in the sky, turning on the surveillance of his surroundings. Very good. Then, let's go, Abant. Wu Ming nodded, then raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Pah! In an instant, a huge black-purple ripple appeared in front of Abonheim. It was Wuming's teleportation skill, and on the other side of the teleportation gate was the holy city that Wuming had been to before. The black-purple ripple kept wriggling as if it was the gate of hell. This was originally the special effect of the teleportation gate. It did not look like much when it was the height of a person, but after it was played out, it was a little nauseating. Anyway, Wuming felt that it was a little strange, so it was better to leave quickly. "Let's go, Abont." After Wuming said that, Abont moved. Although Wuming did not feel any signs of movement, through the surveillance that Abont gave to Wuming, he could see that Abont was gradually entering the teleportation gate that Wuming had opened. In just a moment, Abont was completely submerged in the black-purple ripple. As if he had received a notification, the black-purple ripple instantly closed. Abonheim's departure did not leave any trace. The barren land was still the same barren land, and the large halo in the sky was still the same blue sky. Only this singularity was still collapsing. Chapter 726. The pure white city walls stood on the plains, surrounding the last pure land on this land. The current holy city was called Camelot. It was a holy city with chalk walls. It was built on these ruins. A large group of refugees surrounded the gate of the holy city. They looked up at the holy city from time to time, but after a few glances, they quickly lowered their heads, as if they would tarnish the holy city if they looked too much. The refugees knew that this place was originally a religious holy land, the holy city of Jerusalem. Later, it was occupied by the Lionheart King, Charlie I. However, Charlie I was not a wise king. To say that he was a tyrant was an understatement. He was simply a demon. But fortunately, the cruel and heartless Lionheart King was defeated by the new Lion King. Although the Lionheart King was defeated, almost all the people were displaced because of the war. In order to provide shelter for the people, after the Lion King defeated the Lionheart King, the new holy city was built at an extremely fast speed. This made the people who heard the news very excited. But the truth was beyond their expectations. The Lion King did not open the city to accept the refugees. Instead, he closed the city gate and did not allow the refugees to enter at will. Moreover, he also ordered that the holy city would hold a holy selection every once in a while. As long as they passed the holy selection, they could enter the holy city and start a new life. However, the refugees who had suffered a lot did not want to wait any longer. So, the first bird came out. Defeating the evil Lionheart King made the Lion King on the side of justice in the eyes of the people. The Lion King was benevolent. This was something that many people believed at that time, and even now. However, there were always some people who were not honest. People were divided into good and evil. The good people waited for the holy selection to proceed, while the evil people raised the flag of rebellion. They formed a rebellion army and launched an attack on the holy city. However, how could these so-called rebels be a match for the Lion King who defeated the Lionheart King? In the eyes of outsiders, the rebel army was instantly defeated without any surprise. However, the Lion King forgave them and let them participate in the holy selection. What a benevolent king. These refugees who only knew how to express themselves thought so. However, the problem was that since it was a selection, there must be people who failed. However, this was something that no one noticed. Where did all the people who failed the selection go? The refugees only thought that those people had entered the holy city to live and didn't think too much about it. Even the rebel army that wanted to rebel against the Lion King had the qualifications to enter the holy city. How easy was it for this king to be selected? No, it should be said that this Lion King was very benevolent. In this way, the people who had been displaced by the war would naturally rush here spontaneously after hearing the news. More and more refugees rushed over and entered the holy city. The number of refugees in the wilderness dwindled. The newly arrived refugees did not consider whether the sacred city could accommodate such a large number of refugees. Or rather, they were subconsciously deceiving themselves. Everything was for the sake of survival. Although there were many dangers in the wilderness of this era, due to the changes in the singularity, there were still many refugees who insisted on coming. As long as there was a glimmer of hope to survive in a safe place, people who yearned for a safe environment would not give up. At this moment, the refugees at the entrance of the holy city were the ones who had just arrived. According to the solemn night patrolling around the holy city, the frequency of saint selection had increased. Now, there would be a saint selection every few days. This undoubtedly made the refugees very excited, because they would be safe soon. There would be no more danger and no more harm. According to the solemn night, a group of refugees had been bewitched by the mountain people in the northern mountains and the emissaries of the new powers in the west. They had escaped the holy city selection. How foolish! Every refugee who gathered at the entrance of the holy city for the saint selection thought so. Giving up a good life in the holy city and running to live with the mountain people, were they blinded by faith? However, it seemed that one of the leaders of the mountain people had been killed by the holy city's gatekeepers and the guerrilla knights. It could be considered a lesson for those people. However, this had nothing to do with them. Soon, they would be able to enter the holy city and live a happy life. As if responding to the inner thoughts of the refugees, the gates of the holy city opened. Generally speaking, the patrolling knights around the holy city would not enter or leave the holy city. They had their own strongholds around the holy city. In other words, the opening of the holy city's gates meant that the saint selection was about to take place. Immediately after, the sound of steel armor stepping on the ground came from the holy city's gates. Then, the sound of uniform footsteps, exuding a surging aura, entered the ears of the refugees. All the refugees stood up excitedly and looked at the holy city's gatekeeper, Sir Gawain, who was leading the solemn knights to conduct the saint selection. Without the slightest change, the knights of solemnity surrounded the refugees as if they were preparing for a ceremony. Gawain walked into the encirclement of the solemn knights. He was about to begin the saint selection, as usual. At this moment, there was a sudden commotion among the refugees. Gawain frowned. Could it be that someone would appear this time to stop the saint selection? Could it be the master of Chaldea, who represents the new power, or is it Hassan again? Gawain shook his head. After the saint selection refugees' escape a few days ago, Gawain had brought enough manpower this time. If he still wanted to save the refugees with just a few servants, it would not be so easy. However, I still have to be wary of that winged guy, Gawain muttered to himself. As the representative of the new power, Chaldea's master was indeed not powerful enough. However, Berserker, who had wings like an angel, made Gawain take it a little seriously. As expected of the holy spear that could withstand the holy spear that the king released when he woke up. The people of that new power are indeed very strong. If it were not for the problem of leaving, Gawain would have been more than happy to go all out and have a good fight with that angel. Gawain shook his head. The most important thing now was to proceed with the saint selection smoothly. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain himself to Gawain. Silence! Gawain shouted, and the restless crowd calmed down. However, they all looked at the sky behind them. Gawain was taken aback, then realized something. The holy city was behind him. Could it be that the enemy had launched an air attack? Gawain turned his head and looked at the sky. What he saw made his pupils shrink. For some reason, a huge purplish-black ripple suddenly appeared high in the sky. However, that was not the main point. The main point was the thing that appeared from the purplish-black ripple. It was a huge floating tree. Chapter 7:27. It was not that Gawain had never dealt with enemies in the sky before, but the enemy in the sky that appeared in front of Gawain really shocked him. The height of the floating tree was far from the ground and did not cover the ground in the slightest. The holy city was not covered by the floating tree in the slightest. However, this did not mean that the floating tree in the sky was small. On the contrary, Gawain felt that the floating tree was quite big. Based on Gawain's eyesight and his experience, the floating tree that appeared in the sky was quite large. In any case, it was definitely not smaller than the holy city behind him. The reason why the holy city was not covered by the shadow of the floating tree that appeared in the sky above the holy city was entirely because the new floating tree was too tall. Could it be the new force that appeared? Gawain frowned. When he fought with the angel not long ago, the angel revealed some things. Because it was just a hurried fight, the angel did not announce its name and the name of the force. However, Gawain felt that the new floating tree was related to the angel. Judging from the evidence, the two were indeed closely related. The angel had wings, and the floating tree was extremely high in the sky. Other than flying, Gawain did not know any other way to enter the floating tree. Therefore, this floating tree, which looked like a castle in the sky, should belong to the new force that had appeared. Whether the other party was here to fight or to negotiate, for Gawain, who was guarding the gate of the holy city, there was only one thing he needed to do. Stop the holy selection. Everyone on alert. Gawain immediately ordered the Knights of Solemnity. Yes, the Knights of Solemnity responded to Gawain in unison. However, even if they were to fight, these Knights of Solemnity would probably not be of much use. Gawain thought so. After all, only servants could resist other servants, not to mention that the Knights of the Round Table had first-class servants. These Knights of Solemnity could only be used to clean up those who were not chosen. Although this was the truth, Gawain could not say it out loud. Without saying anything more, Gawain turned around and walked toward the interior of the holy city. The Knights of Solemnity also neatly changed their formation. From the original encirclement of the refugees, they lined up around the holy city. As a result, the refugees began to panic and lose their heads out of fear. The reason was simple. They did not know the background of the giant tree that appeared in the sky, nor did they know whether it was an ally or an enemy. However, the refugees knew one thing. If a fight were to break out, they would definitely be the first to suffer. Rise, the people suffer. Fall, the people suffer. This saying not only applied to the place where this saying originated, but also to any region with royal authority. Gawain didn't seem to have any intention of caring about these refugees. Instead, he immediately entered the holy city. The solemn knights ignored the refugees. Thus, the refugees knew their fate. He was just a dispensable weakling. However, they had no choice. Before the Lion King was a kind person, he was still a king. It was impossible for them to vent their anger on the sacred city. Therefore, the refugees could only vent their frustrations on the floating trees that appeared in the sky. However, the solemn atmosphere at the gate of the holy city made it so that they did not dare to shout and curse. They could only express their dissatisfaction with the floating trees in their hearts. Inside the floating trees, or rather inside a bont, Wuming sat in the monitoring room, silently watching the image of the holy city below. I didn't expect Abont's image to be so clear. Although he did not know how far Abont was from the ground, Wuming knew that it was definitely not close. However, the image that Abont provided was at its largest, so detailed that it could reach the hair of the refugees that had fallen to the ground. Thus, using magic to reach the level of science did not make sense. Master, I'm ready." At this moment, Giliel's voice came from outside the room. Giliel very consciously did not open the door and directly floated in through the wall. The ability of the Skywings to pass through walls made Wuming feel rather helpless. She clearly had the ability of an assassin, so why did she become a berserker? "Then, Master, what do you need me to do? Do you want me to cast Sky Strike?" Giliel asked as she floated around Wuming. "There's no need for that. Besides, even if it's you, I'm afraid you won't be able to cause any damage to the holy city." Wuming did not ridicule Giliel for wanting to cast Sky Strike right from the start. He shook his head rather seriously. "See here." Wuming then zoomed in on the map on the magic screen, shifted his position, and used his finger to point at the interior of the holy city. As Abont was high above the holy city, logically speaking, from the image that Abont provided, he should be able to see the entire interior of the holy city. "But I can't see the interior?" Giliel was slightly surprised. Yes, from the image directly above, one could not see, or rather, could not clearly see the interior of the holy city. The holy city below was clearly just a city, but in the image, the interior of the holy city was filled with a mosaic-like light film. The light blocked the view of the interior, and from the ground, due to the height of the holy city's walls, it was still impossible to see the interior. This should be the defense formed by Artoria's holy spear. Not only can it defend against aerial attacks, it can also block detection, Wu Ming explained to Giliel. Artoria? Master sounds so familiar. Could it be that he's someone Mostet knows? Giliel teased Wu Ming in an ambiguous tone, as if she could tell that Wu Ming had special feelings for that Artoria. Bang! Ouch! Giliel hugged her head and floated around in the control room, trying to relieve the pain. Wu Ming silently put down his fist, and without even looking at Giliel, he got down to business. Abant, can you detect Azrael's magic power? Wu Ming, who could not see the interior of the holy city, could not determine whether Azrael and Gadatsi had entered the holy city, so Wu Ming wanted Abant to detect Azrael's magic power. As someone who was familiar with Azrael, Abant must have a way. Abant did not respond, but a progress bar appeared on the big screen. The progress bar ended, and the map of the holy city, including the surroundings of the holy city, reappeared before Wu Ming. On this map, the location of the city gate and the north were marked with blue marks. It was Azrael's magic power that Abanti had detected, and Abanti had presented it to nothingness as a blue mark. It seemed that Azrael had gone to the north. However, this was not the only thing Wu Ming was concerned about. This is the trace of a battle. Chapter 728. Wasn't it obvious? Wu Ming ordered Azrael to secretly follow Gadatsi and the others. She would not appear unless it was absolutely necessary. However, Abin detected a lot of Azrael's magic power. Wasn't it obvious that Azrael had fought? And Wu Ming felt that the magic power left behind was more like a mark left by Azrael than a trace of a battle. It was normal for a servant to leave behind magic power from a battle. Therefore, Gawain did not deliberately remove the residual magic power, and Gawain's inaction left Azrael's mark behind. The magic power left by Azrael extended all the way to the north. In other words, Gadatsi and the others retreated to the north. Could it be that Tachika and the others just happened to encounter the Saint-Elect? Wu Ming guessed. As the emissary who wanted to see the Lion King, Gadatsi and the others would not have a conflict for no reason. And the only thing that could make Gadatsi and the others have a conflict with the holy city was this Saint-Elect. After all, Artoria was not an unreasonable person. Even if she was deified by the Holy Lance and became the goddess Lungaminiad, if Gadatsi and the others asked for an audience, Artoria would most likely agree. Even if it was because of Chaldea's action of saving the 5 singularities, when Gadatsi and the others asked for an audience, Artoria would agree to see them. Wu Ming estimated that when Gadatsi and the others came here, the Saint-Elect happened to be at the gate of the holy city. Gadatsi and the others could not bear to see the refugees who were not selected to be slaughtered, so they intervened to stop this Saint-Elect from going on. However, it was not correct to say that they stopped it. It should be said that they obstructed it, because Gadatsi and the others did not have the strength to fight against Gawain. Not to mention Da Vinci, in the face of the Knights of the Round Table, the immature Matthew could only protect his master, and Azrael was also ordered by Wu Ming to not show up easily. And their opponent, Gawain, the gatekeeper of the holy city, Wu Ming guessed that he must have received the blessing from the Lion King, just like Tristan. However, even if Gawain did not receive the blessing, Gadatsi and the others could not deal with him. And with Wu Ming's understanding of Gadatsi, after seeing the refugees being slaughtered, she would definitely intervene. She knew that it was impossible, but as long as it was the right thing to do, she would still do it. This was the spirit of the last master of Chaldea, Fujimaru Rika. It was this precious spirit that made all the servants who met Gadatsi were willing to work for her. In fact, to put it simply, Gadatsi had the charisma to attract servants. In this singularity, Wu Ming did not encounter any servants who were alone. So, Wu Ming did not know if there would be anyone other than Azrael to help Gadotsi. Wu Ming would think of the worst-case scenario. Gadotsi was no match for Gawain, and under Azrael's cover, she fled with some of the refugees. As for why they didn't escape with all the refugees, Wu Ming had underestimated Gadotsi. They really didn't have the ability to do so. At most, they could only bring a portion of the refugees away. Even with Azrael, it wouldn't be enough. After all, their number was too small, and it was simply impossible to cover all the refugees. Putting this aside for the time being, Wu Ming had discovered that something was wrong. According to Azrael's remaining battle magic, the direction of escape was the north. Logically speaking, if Gadotsi wanted to escape, she would not escape to the north. After all, Wu Ming was her strongest backing, so she should escape to the west where Wu Ming was. And being forced to retreat to the north did not make sense. With Azrael's cover, Gadotsi was fully capable of moving toward Wu Ming. There was no need for her to go to the unfamiliar north. But Gadotsi still chose to lead the refugees to the north under all kinds of unfavorable circumstances. So, there was only one possibility. Someone suggested that they go to the north. And who was this person? Wu Ming guessed that it was most likely Hassan. It was very likely that Gadotsi and the others came to the holy city to meet the Lion King, but they saw the solemn knight slaughtering the unselected refugees at the end of the holy selection. This made Gadotsi and the others stop them, and it just so happened that Hassan was around. However, Hassan was an assassin and did not have much combat strength. Therefore, under Azrael's cover, Hassan proposed to transfer these refugees to the mountains in the north. That was Hassan's territory, and the villages there were extremely difficult to find, so it was suitable for these refugees. As for why Hassan came to the holy city, it was easy to guess. Hassan had reasons such as wanted to sneak into the holy city to assassinate the Lion King through the holy selection, learn from the refugees rescued by Wu Ming that the holy selection slaughtered the unselected refugees in order to save them, and happened to meet him while collecting information. In short, there were many ways to explain why Hassan appeared here. However, Wu Ming did not know which Hassan met with Gadotsi and the others. However, Wu Ming felt that there was a high possibility that it was the smoke-drunk Hassan whom he saved. Why? It was because she was the one who brought back the refugees who knew the truth about the holy selection. Wu Ming could be sure that there was more than one Hassan on his back, but Wu Ming was not sure if these Hassans could communicate with each other. Even Wu Ming knew that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. In order to avoid the pursuit of the holy city, those Hassans would not have arranged their existences together. If they could not communicate normally, then the Hassan who came here to help Gadotsi and the others was most likely the smoke-drunk Hassan. However, there were exceptions to everything. These were just Wu Ming's guesses. However, one thing was clear. Gadotsi and the others were not in the holy city. Instead, they went to the mountains in the north with Azrael. In this way, there was no need for Wu Ming to continue staying here. With this thought in mind, Wu Ming nodded to himself and then spoke to Abent. Abent, follow the magic power left behind by Azrael and head north. Wu Ming was not prepared to meet with Artoria and the Knights of the Round Table now. The most important thing now was to find Gadotsi and hand over the Holy Grail to Chaldea. However, Abent did not know what Wu Ming was thinking, and neither did Gabriel. Gabriel only knew that she, Wu Ming, and Abent had just arrived here and were about to leave. Hey, Master, are you leaving now? Don't you want to stay a little longer? Gabriel said coquettishly. No, let's find Azrael and the others first. Hey, why are you doing this? Gabriel looked unhappy. Then, Wu Ming once again raised his fist. This caused Gabriel's unhappy face to instantly turn into a happy one. Compared to Gabriel's displeasure, Abent was much more obedient. If his master said he was leaving, then he would leave. However, Wu Ming came so ostentatiously and wanted to leave so simply. It would not be so easy. That was because Gawain had already reported to a group inn, and a group inn had already woken up the Lion King who often slept. Chapter 729. On the tallest spire in the center of the holy city, the Lion King stood alone on an open platform with a holy spear in her hand. Her eyes glowing with golden divinity, Artoria looked at the floating tree in the sky that had begun to move toward the north. Villo. Artoria muttered Wuming's name as she looked at the floating tree. In the holy city, Gawain returned to the gate of the holy city. He had already reported to Egwene, and Egwene said that he had already awakened the king when the enemy appeared. The king also said that he would attack the third party that provoked the holy city. After that, Gawain returned to the gate of the holy city after Egwene gave him a few more instructions. Gawain was determined to be the king's tool, so without Artoria's instructions, Gawain would not do anything else. What he needed to do next was to continue the holy purification and clean up the humans who were not qualified. Continue the holy purification, Knights of Solemnity in position. Following Gawain's order, the Knights of Solemnity surrounded the refugees again. The refugees' faces turned from joy to horror as they began the massacre. Ignoring the refugees' screams, Gawain turned around. None of them are qualified. Recalling what Egwene told him, Gawain shook his head. He said that it was the king who told him to immediately carry out the holy purification, although he did not know why it was so urgent. As a tool, Gawain chose to follow the order. Seeing that most of the refugees had been killed, Gawain shook his head and entered the holy city. Looks like there aren't many people who are qualified to enter the holy city. The Knights of Solemnity would take care of the remaining traces. In the sky, in Abante's monitoring room, Wuming naturally saw the scene of the refugees being slaughtered, but there was nothing he could do, because Wuming found that Artoria had locked onto him. Although Abante could not detect the holy city, Wuming, who had a special connection with Artoria, could feel that he had been locked onto by the holy spear. Artoria did not allow Wuming to interfere with the holy purification because she wanted to prove her determination to Wuming. And Wuming was not a saint, so he would not risk being attacked by the holy spear to save the refugees. Previously, he had only done what he could to save those refugees at the gates of the holy city. The reason why he saved the refugees from Tristan's hands was also because it was within his capabilities. Of course, there was also the matter of face. Those refugees were saved by him, so if they were killed in front of Silent Wonder, then Silent Wonder would lose face. This time, however, it was different. Abante was high up in the sky, far from the ground. Furthermore, Lungo Minyad had locked onto him. This was a ceremony to prove Artoria's decision to Wuming. If Wuming messed up, Artoria wouldn't be polite. More importantly, if Wuming made a move, he might have a falling out with Artoria. If Silent Wonder had been summoned normally as Varen, then as a knight, he would have been influenced by the spirit base to prevent the refugees from being massacred. But it was a pity. Wuming added his main body's authority to this spirit base, summoning the Skywing species and Abante. This spirit base was no longer a pure British silver dragon, Vero, Cyrus said, but the dominant one was the origin dragon, Wuming. Even though the two of them were the same person, Abante, speed up and continue to move north, Wuming urged Abante. Wuming, who had never been to the north, could not use the portal, so he could only use Abante as a vehicle to move. Abant sped up and headed north without stopping. Wuming opened the portal and walked in. After walking out of the portal, Wuming arrived outside of Abante. Wuming silently looked at the tallest tower in the center of the holy city below. It was strange, as if Artoria had removed the shield. Wuming saw Artoria standing at the top of the tallest tower in the holy city. Artoria also raised her head and looked at Wuming. Neither of them spoke. Wuming read some of Artoria's thoughts from her eyes. Artoria's determination showed that she would save people in her own way. Even Wuming could not change her mind. However, Wuming just smiled. He did not think that the first Asan was wrong. He would definitely come back to save Artoria, who was deeply deified. He waved his hand again, and the black and purple ripples swallowed Wuming. Abante, who was moving north, had also moved a large distance. He was almost out of the sky around the holy city. The two met again, and it ended abruptly. Lord Vero, My king, Guinevere was hiding behind one of the buildings on the platform where Artoria was. He was muttering Wooming and Artoria's names. Let's go back, Guinevere. Artoria's sudden voice startled Guinevere. Yes, yes. On the other side, Egwene, who was in the tower of the holy city, saw the floating tree safely leave. He could not help but frown. His king promised him to destroy the enemy, and he did not keep his promise. However, even if his king did not keep his promise, he would not be dissatisfied. It was not something he should think about. Shaking his head silently, Egwene went to welcome Artoria's return. What he needed to do was to eliminate all the enemies, and then sacrifice them all for the sake of his king's great cause. That was all. On Abante's side, Wooming was sitting on the sofa, thinking about the next step of his plan. Artoria had really changed. She was not the kind of person who would do things her own way. As long as someone advised her to do something, she would think about it and ask for more. However, this meeting between Wooming and Artoria made Wooming see that Artoria, as King Wooming, was not determined because she had become the goddess Lungaminiad. In short, she was on the wrong path. For people who were on the wrong path, what they needed was to be pulled up. According to First Hassan, saving the Lion King would not only require Wooming's power, but also the power of the Silver Arm. If I'm not wrong, Bedivere must be in this singularity. However, it was not easy to find someone who could move in a sea of people. It was wiser to meet up with Gadatsi and the others. At this time, Abante gave Wooming a hint. On the magic screen provided by Abante, Wooming saw a team of knights with the symbol of the Holy City's Lion King. The leader was one of the knights of the Round Table that Wooming was familiar with. Lancelot. Chapter 730. That's right, the leading knight was a knight in purple armor, and this knight was Lancelot. What's wrong? Master, do you know that knight? Gilliel heard Wooming's muttering and moved her head closer. Yes, I do know him. Wooming nodded, but his expression was a little awkward. Lancelot was indeed a very upright person. He was recognized as the #1 knight under Artoria other than Wooming. As for why Wooming had to be excluded, it was because the other knights thought that Wooming was simply a monster and could not be included in the ranks of comparison. But that was not the main point. The main point was that Lancelot actually liked Guinevere. Guinevere liked Wooming, and compared to Guinevere, Wooming liked Artoria more. Artoria took the initiative to distance herself from Wooming because of the king for the people reason. This relationship was like a third-rate idol drama, which made Wooming feel quite helpless. Of course, Lancelot liked Guinevere when the timeline was correct. King Arthur's story had silence involvement, and it was very likely that a lot of changes had taken place. The story of the Long March to Seize the Bull and the Epic of Gilgamesh also had a butterfly effect because of Wooming's intrusion. It was already different from the original that Wooming knew, but one thing was certain. Wooming had read the story of King Arthur in the world of the War of the 14 Knights, and also read the story of the deceased King Arthur in the world of Mayu and Ilia. In the story, Lancelot did not exactly show his love for Guinevere. What did this mean? This meant that every world was affected by Wooming. It turned out that although it was a parallel world, because of Wooming's special identity, as long as Wooming made an impact on history in a parallel world, there would be stories of Wooming in every parallel world because of Wooming's special identity. But this did not mean that countless Wooming had experienced an adventure in every parallel world. In Wooming's view, it was more like a copy and paste between worlds. Take, for example, the Gilgamesh that Wooming met was obviously the female version, but the male version was also quite familiar with Wooming, and Wooming was also very familiar with the male version of Gilgamesh, as if they had lived and experienced together. Therefore, Wooming wasn't unfamiliar with the male version of Gilgamesh, and Wooming wasn't unfamiliar to the male version of Gilgamesh either. It was as though Wooming was the male version of Gilgamesh's Hyunryong, but Wooming didn't experience it with a male version of Gilgamesh. In other words, all the Wooming in the parallel worlds had become one person, just like Zelik. And the story that Wu Ming participated in was no longer the story that Wu Ming knew from the beginning of the ordinary world. At the end of King Arthur's story, Guinevere was burned at the stake after Morgan Le Fay's scheme failed and revealed the fact that she loved Wu Ming. In the end, Lancelot robbed the execution ground in the name of loving Guinevere. But Guinevere had also told Wu Ming with certainty that nothing happened between her and Lancelot. Wu Ming could see that Guinevere didn't lie to him. As a reader who had read the King Arthur's legend without Vilo the Ransword, Wu Ming knew that the reason why Lancelot fell in love with Guinevere was because during the process of being Guinevere's knight, both of them gradually developed a spiritual love because of King Arthur's sigh. And Guinevere's knight became Wu Ming. So Lancelot shouldn't have fallen in love with Guinevere anymore. Therefore, Wu Ming didn't need to feel awkward. After all, nothing happened between him and Guinevere. Master, I feel that you and this guy named Lancelot don't have a good relationship. Gillian looked back and forth between Wu Ming and Lancelot on the big screen, as if she really saw some clues. Then, Gillian was warned by Wu Ming's iron fist. No matter what, let's meet Lancelot first. Seeing that Lancelot's direction wasn't the holy city, Wu Ming was curious. There were no houses to live in there, only a large mound. It was impossible for the people of the mountain to live there. So, what did Lancelot go to do? Wu Ming let Abin continue to head north. Although he was a little worried about Gillian staying in Abin's body alone, Gillian, who had been given the vitality incarnation, wouldn't make Wu Ming worry. Then, Wu Ming opened the portal connecting to the ground and walked in. Abin, let me see why Master went to find Lancelot. As soon as Wu Ming left, Gillian stopped covering her head and flew to the big screen excitedly. However, the big screen that was playing Lancelot suddenly turned black. Hey, why is it like this, Abbott? Gillian shouted regretfully. Then, a line of words appeared on the big screen. Hey, what's this? Gillian curiously went up. If I knew you would peep at me, I would have let Abbott cut off the image when you came over. Just wait for another bump on your head. Sigh. Gillian was stunned. Then, Gillian's sorrowful voice was heard. Hey. On the ground, in the shadow of a mound, a dark purple ripple opened and Wu Ming walked out. Was that Gillian's scream just now? Wu Ming smiled as he looked at the teleportation gate that was almost closed. She's really dishonest. Shaking his head, Wu Ming stopped thinking about Gillian. The mound that Wu Ming chose was a mound that Abin had detected that Lancelot's troops had to pass through. Presumably, Lancelot would arrive soon. Wu Ming looked at his clothes. Before that, I should change into a knight's armor. As Wu Ming spoke, magic power surged and covered Wu Ming's entire body, including his head. A few seconds later, a handsome silver-white knight wearing armor and a cloak appeared. Now, all I need to do is wait. After saying that, Wu Ming casually sat cross-legged and waited quietly. After a few minutes, Lancelot's troops, which were not moving very quickly, arrived. As Wu Ming was sitting in the shadow of the mound, ordinary knights would not be able to see him clearly from afar. However, with Lancelot's eyesight, he could naturally see him clearly. Everyone, stop advancing and rest. Lancelot's pupils suddenly shrank, and he immediately issued an order to the troops behind him. Then, he rode his horse towards Wu Ming's location. Chapter 731. The horse's speed was not fast, so Lancelot gave up halfway through the ride. Lancelot agilely jumped down from the horse and ran towards Wu Ming's direction. The black horse that was abandoned by Lancelot stopped and stayed where it was. Lancelot came to a position a few meters in front of Wu Ming. Lancelot, who was dizzy with joy, calmed down. Lancelot didn't know what to say for a moment. It was as if his voice recorder was stuck. What? Don't you recognize me, Lancelot? Wu Ming, who was sitting cross-legged, looked at Lancelot and took off his helmet. The helmet turned into magic power and disappeared with the wind like sand. Then, Wu Ming's face, which was rather familiar to Lancelot, appeared. Sir Vilo, it's really you? Lancelot instantly became agitated, but immediately after, Lancelot put on a sorrowful look. If you came a little earlier, how good would that be? Lancelot's tone was full of helplessness. Are you referring to the matters regarding our king? Although the relationship between Wooming and Artoria was known by Guinevere, and the other Knights of the Round Table also saw some clues, but in front of the Knights of the Round Table, Wooming still called Artoria our king. Yes, Sir Villo. If you came a little earlier, maybe you could save our king. Lancelot nodded. Regarding this point, Silent Wonder admitted that he and Lancelot had the same thoughts. If he came here a little earlier, Artoria wouldn't have become like this, assimilated by the goddess. But it's not too late now. After the first Hassan reminded Wooming, Wooming also understood that he could still save Artoria with his own strength and the silver arm. By the way, Lancelot, you look a little different from Gao, Winching, and the others. Wooming looked at Lancelot meaningfully. Of course, Wooming was referring to Lancelot's attitude towards Artoria. The other knights were all loyal to Artoria. No matter what happened to Artoria, they would not feel sad about it. But Lancelot was very sad because of the change of the king, and this sadness burst out when he saw Wooming. You're right, Sir Villo, I feel sad about it. Lancelot nodded. Our king's current approach is not right. I wanted to stand on the opposite side of our king and fight our king with Guy. Lancelot said, as if he was reminiscing. However, only you, Lord Varen, can save our king. This is what Kai, Lamarck, Gaholis, and the others who stand against our king all agree on. Lancelot closed his eyes as he spoke. Hearing Lancelot's words, Wooming recalled the faces of Guy and the others. Just like how Wooming was familiar with them, they were also familiar with Wooming. They believed that the Lion King could be saved by Wooming. I'm a sinner. I betrayed our king, and I don't want to betray him again. So, like Gawain, I chose to stand on the side of our king and become a knight who will listen to our king. But Lancelot opened his eyes, which were filled with sadness and pain. I don't want to see our king go down the wrong path. I don't want to see our queen cry. I don't want to see Camelot die. Don't want to see our queen cry. Hearing this, Wooming was a bit surprised. It seemed that Lancelot still had some yearning for Guinevere. Guy and the others understood the pain in my heart. They understood me and entrusted the important task of finding you to me. After that, I volunteered to become a ranger knight, hoping to find you in advance. Lancelot did not believe that Wooming, as a knight of the Round Table, would not be summoned. Lancelot believed that, just like Galahad and Bedivere, Wooming must have been summoned to another place in this area because of some unforeseen circumstances. Heaven did not disappoint the faithful. Lancelot, finally found Wooming today. I finally found you, Sir Villo. Lancelot looked at Wooming with hope and excitement. However, Wooming did not care much about Lancelot's excitement. I say, Lancelot, it must not feel good to kill a friend. Wooming turned his head to the distance and looked at the scenery in the distance. Lancelot was silent. How could it feel good? Whether it was Tristan, Gawain, Mordred, or Lancelot, although they were all on the king's side, the matter of killing a comrade was still a knot in their hearts. Even the most cold-hearted and seemingly most loyal to the king, a gull, who was not important to the king, had a slight fluctuation in his heart. After all, they were comrades who had fought together for more than a decade. Even if he knew that they had all become heroic spirits and descended in the form of servants, how could he just kill them? The pain and sin of killing a comrade with his own hands would not disappear. Presumably, Guy and the others also thought the same. Not only did they have to brandish their swords at their own compatriots, but they also had to attack the king they were loyal to. How much condemnation did they have to make such a decision? Seeing that Lancelot did not say anything, Wooming spoke. I have been to the holy city and met the king and queen. Gawain also told me about you. Lancelot was stunned, then his eyes became gloomy. With Gawain's personality, he must have told Wooming everything. The villain must be very disappointed in us. Not only did we not stop the king, but we also killed our own. The thing that left the deepest impression on me was that Gawain told me about Gareth. Lancelot's expression became even gloomier. Whether it was the accidental killing of Gareth in his previous life or the guilt of not being able to kill Gareth in this life, Lancelot's heart was painful. That child is still as innocent as ever, just like Galahad. Wuming said with nostalgia. Wuming did not have the slightest sadness or anger, as if he was talking about an ordinary matter. Don't stand, sit down and talk, Wuming said to Lancelot with a smile. Lancelot was puzzled by Wuming's emotions. Why was he always so calm? But in the end, Lancelot sat down beside Wuming. Every knight of the Round Table is a good person. Guy and the others chose to stand against Artoria, and you chose to be completely loyal to Artoria. Wuming did not add the honorific Ching, nor did he address Artoria as queen. The tone of his communication with Lancelot also changed from colleague to friend. Whether it is you or them, you all acted for your own beliefs. I don't think there is anything to be sad about. Chapter 732. Lancelot listened quietly and did not interrupt. In order to prevent Artoria from going astray, they stood against her. In order to make up for the mistakes of your past life, you stood on Artoria's side. Even if you betrayed the king you served, even if you killed your own people, it was a choice you made based on your own beliefs, and you worked hard to live for it. Wuming paused for a moment, then looked at Lancelot. This result may be sad in the eyes of others, but in my opinion, as a knight of the Round Table, this is not something to be sad about. Lord Villo. Lancelot looked at Wuming blankly. Take Gareth, for example. She believed that the king was right, and she thought the same when she left. However, her pure spirit, which was not weaker than Galahad's, could not bear the inner condemnation of killing her own people, so she chose a suitable time to voluntarily leave. In my opinion, Gareth did a good job. Take you, for example. In order to find me, you endured the pain of killing your own people. Take Artoria, for example. She proved her will to me, and I witnessed Artoria's proof. For this, a group of refugees died in front of me. This sentence shocked Lancelot. As someone who knew Wuming well, he knew that Wuming would not be stingy to help those who could be saved. Then, Wuming's eyes became firm. However, if I had to do it again, I would still choose to stand by and do nothing. There was no such thing as a free lunch in the world, and there was no such thing as a free lunch. There was no such thing as a free lunch. In order to stop Artoria, Guy and the others were filled with condemnation. In order to protect Artoria, Lancelot and the others were stained with the blood of their own people. In order to protect humans, Artoria chose to turn them into specimens and bear the pain of others' incomprehension. In order to be loyal to Artoria, Gareth chose to be stained with the blood of his own people and had a nervous breakdown. In order to bear witness to Artoria's decision, Wuming did not save them, which went against his usual style. The price was light, and the result was the same. There is no need to be sad about the past. Even if this sadness was caused by us, no matter what, this is the choice of the Knights of the Round Table. All we need to do is to look forward. Wuming wouldn't be immersed in the past. This was his way of survival as the Origin Dragon. This was also why Wuming's heart hadn't aged and was forever filled with the vigor of a youth. Because his heart was looking forward. Lancelot fell into silence. Wuming was right. It was because of his hesitation, because he was immersed in the guilt of betraying his king in the past, that he decided to be completely loyal to Artoria in this life. It was because Gawain felt guilty that his dissatisfaction with Lancelot had led to the Battle of Camlan, which ultimately led to the fall of Arthur's dynasty. That was why Gawain chose to be completely loyal to Artoria and become a tool without thinking. Tristan had hurt Artoria because of his words when she was alive. In order to make up for it, he also decided to be completely loyal to Artoria. It was the same for everyone. Because they wanted to make up for something, they chose to stand in their original position and wanted to do better. If we all let go of the past, will we be able to pull our king back from the wrong path? Lancelot said thoughtfully. However, they had already come this far. Just like Wuming said, they shouldn't be immersed in the past. They had to look forward. In short, I have found a way to save Artoria. Don't worry, leave it to me, Lancelot, Wuming said with a smile and extended his hand to Lancelot. Lancelot was stunned, then shook Wuming's hand. Yes, I'm counting on you, Lord Vero. This was a promise between friends. Lancelot chose to believe in wombing. Then, Lord Villo, what do you want to do next? Do you need to go to my camp to prepare? Lancelot stood up and asked respectfully. Now that the conversation between friends had ended, Lancelot also added a respectful title to wombing. You have a camp outside the Holy City? Wombing was stunned. Was Lancelot not going to return to the Holy City to stay? Because I was anxious to find you. I have applied to stay outside for a long time. My king also agreed to my application, so I have my own camp, Lancelot explained. Since you have a camp, then let's go take a look. So, Wombing joined Lancelot's team and set off together. In Abani's body, Giliel had stopped Abani's actions. Abani had brought her to the sky above the northern mountains. Next, she needed Wombing's instructions. So slow, master, Giliel said in boredom as she rolled around in the air. However, at this moment, Wombing was already on the way to Lancelot's camp. Wombing rode a magically created horse and walked side by side with Lancelot at the front of the team. By the way, Mordred is also a gorilla knight, right? Does she also have her own camp outside the Holy City? Wombing asked curiously. No, Mordred's words are a little special. Lancelot's expression became subtle when talking about Mordred. My king did not prepare a residence for Mordred in the Holy City, but Mordred should not have a residence outside. Due to Mordred's personality, she did not have a fixed residence. Moreover, she did not bring many knights with her. It could be said that compared to Lancelot, Mordred was a true gorilla knight. As expected of her, Wombing's mouth twitched slightly. By the way, does Lord Villo know about Chaldea? Lancelot suddenly asked. Oh, are you talking about the last master? Wombing had a smile on his face. As expected, you know about the existence of Chaldea. Lancelot nodded and began his explanation. Yesterday, the master of Chaldea and the mountain folk in the north fled to the northern mountains with a group of St. Bard refugees. I happened to be nearby and was ordered to pursue them by agronomy. Gorilla Knights seemed to be a noble title, but in fact, they were scouts and vanguards. To put it bluntly, if something happened, they would be the first to go up to the Holy City. The reason why Tristan was often sent out by agronomy was because of the instability of the Gorilla Knights. After all, if you were here today, you might be there tomorrow. You really pursued them? Wombing looked at Lancelot with a strange and subtle expression. After all, Matthew, who was possessed by Galahad, was among them. Chapter 733. Actually, they didn't. Lancelot shook his head and continued. When I caught up with them, they were already at the edge of the mountain. Immediately after, Lancelot explained to Wombing. Because Lancelot did not want to catch Chaldea's people, he went easy on them a little. In Lancelot's opinion, it was not a big deal at all. As a result, most of the refugees entered the mountain. Most of the refugees had already entered the mountain, but when Lancelot caught up with Gadotsi and the others, there were still many refugees who did not enter the mountain. Gadotsi and the others, who were at the back, did not enter the mountain either. Just as Lancelot was about to take down Gadotsi and the others and take this opportunity to show his goodwill, someone appeared to stop him. A green-haired girl with angel wings came from the direction of the Holy City and attacked me. Hearing Lancelot's words, Wombing's expression became slightly subtle. Unsurprisingly, the green-haired girl was Azriel. Because Lancelot received the news that the refugees were intercepted halfway, he did not know what happened in the Holy City, so he was very surprised by the green-haired girl's arrival. That was a servant. I could clearly sense it. Lancelot's expression became serious. That servant is not weaker than me. If we continue to fight, the possibility of me losing is very high. It was normal for Lancelot to think that he was no match for Azriel. Putting aside Azriel's age and combat experience, the Skywing race was a fighting race, a god-slaying weapon. In a melee, Lancelot might not be able to gain an advantage over Azriel. Moreover, Azriel was a mage. A sky strike was enough to make Lancelot suffer, not to mention other kinds of magic. I really did not expect that the Master of Chaldea would have such a strong person protecting him. Because of my fight with the green-haired girl, the Master of Chaldea took the opportunity to enter the mountain. After Lancelot finished speaking, he looked at Wooming. He felt that Wooming seemed to have something to say from the start. "Sir Villo, do you have something to say?" Lancelot asked, puzzled. No, a little bit." Wooming shook his head, then paused and nodded. It's better not to explain too much to Lancelot. Of course, this didn't mean that Wooming was prepared to hide everything. He would still tell Wooming about his relationship with Chaldea. "By the way, Lancelot, do you know that I'm actually quite close to Chaldea?" Wooming's revelation made Lancelot's eyes widen. "Really, Lord Villo, you've already established a good relationship with the Master of Chaldea? It seems like my actions were unnecessary." Lancelot shook his head in self-mockery. Wooming wasn't bothered by Lancelot's self-mockery. Then, Wooming continued, "You should know that Galahad is the servant of Master Chaldea." Nay, suddenly, the black horse under Lancelot let out a blood-curdling screech. Wooming looked over and saw that Lancelot's body had tensed up. This made Lancelot's legs exert a lot of strength. The powerful leg force caused a lot of pressure on the black horse's abdomen, causing the black horse to neigh. "Hey, Sir Lancelot, your mount can't stand your strength. Be careful," Wooming immediately reminded. "I'm sorry, Sir Villo, I made a fool of myself." Lancelot's tensed body immediately relaxed. The former, "I'm sorry," was said to his mount, and the latter was said to Wooming. Although it couldn't be compared to his mount when he was alive, this black horse had accompanied Lancelot for a long time. Lancelot also had some feelings for this black horse. "Look at you. You don't seem to know that Galahad is the servant of Master Chaldea." Wooming's words made Lancelot feel awkward. I really don't know," Lancelot replied rather awkwardly. Although Lancelot had caught up with Gadotsi and the others because of Osriel's interception, Lancelot didn't really meet with Gadotsi and even Matthew. He also didn't know that the person Galahad possessed was Matthew. Now that Wooming said this, Lancelot was shocked. "That, Sir Villo, although I didn't have close contact with Master Chaldea, I saw Chaldea's group in the distance. It seems that my son isn't among them." This was true. Lancelot had caught up with Gadotsi and the others. Although he didn't do anything, Lancelot glanced at Chaldea's group from a distance. However, because the distance was too far, Lancelot couldn't effectively perceive Galahad's aura, and Lancelot didn't find his son, so he didn't pay attention. It's normal that you didn't notice because Galahad had given its power to a girl and then fell into a deep sleep. "I see. Is it a demi-servant?" Lancelot nodded. After all, he was also a regular servant. He still understood the operation of possessing others and falling into a deep sleep after handing over power. "But, Lancelot, you don't seem to know anything." Wooming cast a strange look at Lancelot. Just from the fact that Lancelot didn't know that Wooming had been to the Holy City, it was enough to see that Lancelot's information was slightly outdated, not to mention that Lancelot also had a lot of mistakes in other aspects. "This can't be helped." Lancelot smiled helplessly and shook his head. "After all, Agruman doesn't like me very much. Compared to the betrayal of others, in Agruman's eyes, Lancelot's betrayal was more shameful, so he was quite displeased with Lancelot. Not to mention that Lancelot himself also asked to stay outside the Holy City, which was what Agruman wanted. In other information, Agruman even deliberately withheld information and deliberately didn't tell Lancelot. Just like Wooming's matter, Agruman deliberately didn't tell Lancelot. After all, Lancelot, as a guerrilla knight, ran around all day and basically didn't need any information, so Agruman simply chose not to tell Lancelot. The order to intercept Gadotsi and the others was given to him by Gawain when he found out that Lancelot was in the vicinity of the Holy City, and he chose to attack. Before that, Lancelot didn't even know that Chaldea's people had come here. He only knew that Chaldea would come. "You are really pitiful." Wooming helplessly shook his head. "I don't feel pitiful, Agruman, doing this. I also feel that I am peaceful. After all, there were no complicated orders. which was also beneficial for Lancelot to find Wooming. Although now he found him, and also found his son. Son? Wait a minute. Lancelot stopped the horse. My son seems to have become a daughter? Chapter 734. That's true, but whether the other party recognizes you as his father or not is another matter. Wooming attacked mercilessly. Wooming was not very familiar with Matthew, but he was not a stranger either. In Wooming's opinion, Matthew was not the kind of child who would casually recognize others as his father, but this was not certain. After all, Matthew's spirit base belonged to Galahad, and refugees would be affected. Lancelot fell into a deep silence. Unlike Wooming, Lancelot thought that he had a good relationship with Galahad. But because of this, Lancelot could clearly realize that Galahad was actually very strict with him as a father. When the king went astray, he did not intervene in time. Instead, he let the king go and even joined the king on the wrong path. With what he was doing now, he was afraid that Galahad would not recognize him. After all, Galahad had obtained the Holy Grail and was known as the Holy Grail Knight. Even if there were other secrets, it could not cover up Lancelot's mistake. Even if Matthew was not the real Galahad and was only possessed by Galahad, Galahad's feelings for him were likely to affect Matthew. Therefore, in Lancelot's opinion, his daughter, son, might be quite angry, and it was also very likely that they would not recognize him as their father. Don't be so negative. If you admit your mistake, I think Galahad, or Matthew, will forgive you. Wooming smiled and patted Lancelot on the shoulder. However, Lancelot just sighed and lowered his head helplessly. I hope so. During this conversation, they almost reached Lancelot's base. This place is very remote. Looking at the house with a sharp corner surrounded by the hills in front of him, Wooming, who was walking all the way, commented, "When I was looking for you in the wilderness, I accidentally found this secluded place," Lancelot explained. But there was one thing that Wooming was quite puzzled. This shouldn't be your base outside the holy city, right? Wooming didn't mean anything else. He just felt that this place didn't look like a base for the external knights of the holy city. Even if it wasn't on the plains, it had to be built in a terrain that fit the style of a knight. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get past Egwalin. Words like, "You're not fit to be my king's knight," "It's not proper to be an outpost of the holy city in such a secluded place," and so on would definitely be used by Egwalin. If it was Egwalin, he would definitely say something like that. Moreover, he would be suspected of targeting Lancelot. That was why Wooming said that this place didn't look like an outpost of the holy city, but more like a hidden secret base. Is that what you want to say, Lord Villo? Wooming nodded. There was no other reason other than this place was too advantageous as a secret base. "Indeed, this is not where my troops are stationed," Lancelot explained to Wooming. "Oh, could it be that it's really as I guessed?" Wooming's interest was piqued. Although he was suspicious, it was just a guess. Did he get right? Lancelot didn't say much. He just nodded slightly and then signaled the knights behind him to go ahead first. The knights behind Lancelot responded and accelerated in unison. They rushed from both sides of Lancelot and Wooming towards the base that was surrounded by many low hills. After the knights left, Wooming and Lancelot rode their horses and slowly walked forward. "Lord Villo, as you know, I don't agree with my king's way of doing things," Lancelot began to explain to Wooming. Lancelot just couldn't betray Artoria again, so he chose to side with her. In other words, it was reasonable that Lancelot disagreed with Artoria's way of doing things. "If I meet refugees in the wild, I'll protect them without the knowledge of the other knights of the Round Table and my king. In front of us is the place where the refugees live." Lancelot was indeed the hesitant Lancelot. Although he chose to side with Artoria, he still chose to do some dirty tricks in private. Of course, it was a dirty trick for the Holy City, but in Wooming's eyes, Lancelot did a good job. Good job, Lancelot. If Galahad knows about this, he'll definitely be impressed. Lancelot accepted Wooming's compliment. "I've been on the wrong path. Even if I were to do it again, I wouldn't do it exactly the same way." Lancelot meant that even if he chose to side with Artoria, He wouldn't kill the refugees unless it was Artoria's order. Compared to Gawain and the others who were rigid, Lancelot was more flexible. As a knight, he couldn't betray Artoria again, but he would save the refugees in private. There was no doubt that Lancelot, who was on the Lion King's side, was cleared up a lot. Of course, Lancelot also had a little selfish motive. In order not to disappoint his son, as a father, Lancelot naturally had to take action. Now that his son had become a daughter, Lancelot believed that he had to work harder. The soul of daughter control, burn, asterisk cough, cough asterisk. Let's go and see this secret base of yours. Ignoring Lancelot's soul of daughter control burning face, Wooming urged his horse to speed up. Seeing Wooming speeding up, Lancelot, who realized what was going on, also sped up his horse to catch up with Wooming. A moment later, the scene of a post-disaster camp appeared in front of Wooming's eyes. Simple tent-like houses made of unknown materials were arranged in an orderly manner in a valley surrounded by hills. Wooming could see that these tent-like houses looked simple, but they were quite sturdy. At the very least, they could completely block the rain, snow, and hail. I've arranged knights to patrol the entrance and the hills. Plus, the terrain here is remote, so it can be used as a shelter for the refugees. Lancelot did a good job. There were patrolling knights around the camp, responsible for security. There were also many ordinary people walking between the tent-like houses. Judging from their clothes, they were indeed refugees. The refugees all had smiles on their faces. Although they were trying to find joy in the midst of hardship, their smiles were not fake. Because it was the Middle East, water was relatively scarce. However, Wooming unexpectedly saw a rather simple well in the corner. Chapter 735. These refugees found it by accident, Lancelot explained. After all, Lancelot was a knight and not an expert in water conservancy. Naturally, he could not find a water source in this secret base. As natives of the Middle East, although it was not their specialty, these refugees naturally had some ways to find a water source. However, they did not expect there to be a water source here. Therefore, an extremely simple well was created. It had to be said that these refugees were really lucky to be rescued in a chaotic world. Not only did they have a safe place to live, but they also had a water source. As for food, Lancelot would regularly bring his knights to deliver food to the refugees. Although it was easy to attract the attention of the holy city, it was not a problem to bring a small amount of food if the interval between visits was shortened. Although they did not bring a lot of food each time, the frequency was high. As Lancelot was a guerrilla knight, there was no problem for him to run around every day. Lancelot would come here once every few days to deliver food to the refugees. Sometimes it would be 1 or 2 days, sometimes it would be 2 or 3 days. The refugees had been suffering from hunger before and had scrimped on food. In addition to Lancelot's frequent delivery of food, the refugees did not lack food. At the very least, they had food and shelter. These refugees were very satisfied. Unlike before, they didn't have any food to eat, and they didn't even know when they would die. Lancelot came this time to deliver food to the refugees. However, he happened to meet Wooming on the way and invited Wooming to come along. "Thank you for your hard work, Lancelot," Wooming said to Lancelot without turning his head as he looked at the knights distributing food to the refugees. "Of course not, Sir Villo. I am just atoning for my sins." Lancelot did not feel that it was hard for him. In fact, it was in line with his knight's ethics and his way of survival. "Forget it, as you wish." Wooming shook his head. After taking a look around the camp, Wooming said his goodbyes. "After all, I came here because I was interested in hunting. I have other things to do," Wooming said. "Sir Villo, are you going to the mountains in the north?" Lancelot asked. "That's right. I'm going to the mountain people's territory to look for Chaldea's master." Wooming had no doubt that Lancelot had guessed his next move. The Knights of the Round Table were not only outstanding in terms of bravery, but also in terms of intelligence. They would not be able to lead troops in a battle. Of course, some of the more special Knights of the Round Table were exceptions. Lancelot, You'd better continue to be a gorilla knight. I'll look for you when the time comes." When Wooming said, "when the time comes," he actually did not know when that time would come. After all, things were always changing. Lancelot could be used like the Skywings as a trump card. "Well then, Sir Villo, I won't see you off. Besides, staying in the same place for a long time isn't the style of a gorilla knight like me. I'm going to leave as well." Wooming nodded. He wasn't so pretentious that he needed someone to send him off. "Then, I'll take my leave first. Sir Villo." Just as Wooming was about to leave, he suddenly heard Lancelot call out to him. "HM." Wooming turned to look at Lancelot. As if he did not dare to look Wooming in the eye, Lancelot silently lowered his head. "The person the Queen likes is you. There's nothing between the Queen and me. If you feel that I've tarnished the Queen's reputation, you can take my life at any time. I won't complain." Lancelot's tone was heavy and self-reproachful. Although Lancelot was trying to save Guinevere, who had almost been burned at the stake, his actions had indeed tarnished Guinevere's reputation. "Don't worry, Lancelot. I don't take this matter to heart." Not only did he trust Lancelot, but he also trusted Guinevere. To be honest, Lancelot had fought side by side with him for many years. He knew Lancelot very well. Lancelot could indeed do such a thing. But the most important thing was that Wooming believed in Guinevere. Guinevere had been secretly in love with him for many years. Because of Artoria, Guinevere had been enduring until Wooming left. It wasn't unreasonable for Guinevere to fall for Morgan Le Fay's scheme so easily. Guinevere was madly in love with Wooming. That kind of madness made Guinevere, a heroic spirit, sublimated. Although Guinevere looked weak when he met Wooming before, Guinevere appeared as a berserker. Although he couldn't cheat like Ruler, Wooming could still distinguish the ranks. This reminded Wooming of the berserker Kyoheim he met in the American Singularity. Fortunately, Guinevere's madness was different from Kyoheim's. The different madness allowed Guinevere to gain different abilities from Kyoheim. Guinevere couldn't lie to Wooming. Although Wooming didn't know this, Wooming could see from Guinevere's eyes that Guinevere didn't lie. That was enough. After all, trust was quite important. Of course, this didn't mean that Wooming didn't believe in Lancelot, but Guinevere was more trustworthy. Moreover, Lancelot, who didn't have much contact with Guinevere, didn't have a good impression of Guinevere. In a joking way, Defeated Dog Lancelot was a good title. Asterisk Sigma for all, Lancelot didn't serve as Guinevere's guard knight, and they didn't have a long bond. Plus he missed Wooming. Guinevere's impression of Lancelot as mind was just a knight loyal to the king and a knight who worshipped Wooming. "Guinevere has explained it to me. Don't overthink. Just focus on your own things. You should know that Galahad is a singularity. Let's not talk about others, but at the very least, don't disappoint Galahad. Yes, Villo, Sama, I will remember your words." Lancelot, who was touched by Wooming's trust and relationship, was moved by Wooming's knight salute. "Then, I'll leave first." After Wooming finished, he waved his hand, and a black-purple ripple appeared, engulfing Wooming's body, and then disappeared. Looking at the place where Wooming disappeared, Lancelot looked serious and said slowly, "Villo, Sama, I will live up to your expectations." Chapter 736. Wooming left. After checking the surroundings, Lancelot also left with his troops. This camp was still very safe, so there was no need for too much protection. If they did that, it might even attract attention. This was why Wooming didn't take any protective measures against the camp. On the other side, inside Abenheim's body, in the monitoring room that Abent specially built for Wooming, Gilliel was lying on her back in boredom, floating in the air like a rootless duckweed. "Master is so slow, why isn't he back yet?" Gilliel said in boredom. Abent had now arrived at the northern mountainous area and had stayed here for quite some time. This gave people the feeling that Wooming has been gone for a long time. However, this wasn't the case. After Wooming left Abent's body, he landed on the ground and waited for Lancelot to start counting, chatting with Lancelot, following Lancelot to the refugee camp, and finally visiting and staying in the camp. Although this series of events took some time, it definitely wasn't long. At most, it would take 1 or 2 hours. The long time that Gopral mentioned was just her own complaint. However, it was normal for Giliel to be so bored. Even if it was only half an hour, it was a boring time that was difficult for Giliel to pass. However, this was the real Giliel, wasn't it? At this moment, a dark purple portal suddenly appeared beside the sofa, and a person wearing east wind clothing walked out of the ripples. This person was Wooming. "Master, you're finally back." Giliel was like a bird returning to its nest. The wings on her back flapped as she flew toward Wooming. "I'm back, Giliel." Wooming first smiled as he answered Giliel, then spoke again. "After I left, you didn't mess around, did you, Giliel?" Wooming still looked at Giliel with a smile, but this smile was so cold in Giliel's eyes. Iciness caused Jillian, who was flying in the air, to stop instantly. Then, Jillian obediently descended from the air. How could that be? "I'm sure I didn't mess around, Master. You have to believe me." Seeing Wooming's clenched fists, Gopral hurriedly explained with a yawn. Wooming smiled as he walked up to Gopral and raised his hand. Jillian closed her eyes subconsciously. Then, she felt a palm stroking her head. Gopral opened her eyes and coincidentally saw Wooming retract his hand from Gopral's head. That's right, Wooming was actually stroking Jillian's head. "Seeing that I'm in a good mood, I'll let you off today." After Wooming finished speaking, he turned around and sat on the sofa. Giliel, who had been left in a daze, came to her senses and touched her head uncomfortably. She was not used to Wooming being so gentle to her. After all, every time he Wooming, he would knock on her head. This sudden touch left Giliel a loss. Ever since she became Wooming's dependent, Giliel had never considered whether Wooming trusted her as a subordinate or the question of her loyalty to Wooming. Firstly, she believed in the former master of the Skywings, Arthas, and also believed that Arthas was the new master they had found. Secondly, no matter who the master was as a weapon, she just had to do her job well. Therefore, Giliel's attitude toward Wooming was very casual. Although Wooming often knocked on Giliel's head, that did not mean that Wooming hated her. It was just a casual, small punishment. Giliel naturally understood this, so she did not mind. However, habit was a scary thing. Having gotten used to being knocked on the head, she was not used to the sudden touch. "In any case, I don't have to suffer." Giliel smiled. After all, Wooming was likely to be their master for life if nothing went wrong, so she just had to follow in his footsteps. Giliel gently flapped her wings and flew behind Wooming, looking like she had not learned her lesson. Wooming naturally noticed Giliel's abnormality, but Wooming did not do anything. If he did something right, he would be rewarded, and if he did something wrong, he would be punished. If he was in a good mood, Wooming did not mind giving out extra rewards, such as a pat on the head. If he was in a bad mood, Wooming did not mind giving out extra punishments, such as a spanking. Perhaps it was this calmness that made Giliel become more and more impudent. Not thinking about this anymore, Wooming looked at the virtual screen that Abin had brought up again. It showed the scene of the mountainous area below. Abin isn't slow. Wooming sighed. Wooming had visually estimated the distance and estimated the time Abin would take, but Abin still gave Wooming a pleasant surprise. Although his body was rather large, Abin was not like those massive creatures. He still had the advantage of speed. When Wooming returned, Giliel's bored look indicated that Abin had been here for a while. Although he did not know the exact time, this also meant that Abin was not slow. After all, Abin is a fantasy breed master. That's a race that's close to God. Abin, who was able to follow Arq, was one of the best among fantasy breeds, so his speed was naturally not slow. As expected of Abin, Wooming praised Abin. Then, "Abin, can you find a village in these mountainous areas?" Wooming said, while looking at the magic screen. Abin was indeed above the mountainous area, but it was not small. Logically speaking, when looking down from the sky, it should be very easy to find the place he wanted to find, not to mention finding a village in the mountainous area. Logically speaking, it should be very conspicuous. However, because Abin was too high up, he could not see the exact situation on the ground. If he shrank it, He would only be able to see the specific situation of a small area. Thus, Wuming asked Abent if he could find a village in the mountainous area. Wuming thought that if it really did not work, he would contact Azrael and give it a try. With the contract of the dependent incarnation, Wuming could naturally contact Azrael, but because he needed to reduce the consumption of magic power, Wuming closed his connection with the other Skywing breeds, only keeping the identity of master and servant. But before Abent could answer, Giliel answered first. There's no need to go through so much trouble, master. Below where we are now is actually a village. Chapter 737. As if to confirm Gopril's words, Abant activated the magic power virtual screen and continuously shrunk the map below him. Immediately after, a village built on a mountain, as if the mountain had been modified, appeared in front of Wuming. Abant's operation was very similar to a real map, which made Wuming's eyes light up. You're really becoming more and more modern. Well done, Abant. Actually, we were just lucky. When Abant stopped and explored below, we discovered that there was a village below Abant. It's most likely the mountain people that Master is looking for. Gopril answered Wuming in a rather serious tone, not minding that she used the word we. If one ignored this sentence and thought about it, it was normal for Abant to be able to discover the village below him. As a weapon, with a good sense of war, Abant would definitely check if there were any threats around him in an unfamiliar environment, especially below him. Abant was a complete fantasy breed, but fantasy breeds were also animals, and animals still value their abdomens. However, it was also because of this that Abant discovered the village of the mountain people, which saved Wuming the effort of finding them. In that case, Gopril, come down with me and take a look, Wuming said as he stood up. Really, master? Instead, it was Giliel who became excited. After all, Wuming had refused to bring Gopril out with various reasons, so Gopril had no choice but to stay. This time, she could finally go out to play and help. How could Gopril not be excited? I feel bad about leaving you here all the time, but I'll say this in advance. Don't cause me trouble. Wuming was giving her a sweet date, but the effect was quite obvious to Gopril. Yes, master. I know. Therefore, Wuming brought Gopril, who was full of flattery and smiles, into the portal. Below Abant, in the village built on the mountain, the simple and unadorned villagers worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. Even if there wasn't enough food and the water wasn't clean, they weren't dispirited because of this, and they didn't frown because of the war. Although the war did not affect them to a certain extent, it could be seen from this that the people of the mountains were optimistic. However, optimism did not mean that the mountain people were brave. At this moment, they were frightened by the sudden appearance of the black-purple ripples at the village entrance. Because the village wasn't very big and it was daytime, the villagers were all busy. Therefore, the abnormality at the entrance of the village instantly attracted everyone's attention. Quickly go and find Lord 100 Faces. It was not known who shouted, but someone immediately reacted. A few thin and light youths who looked like they could run quickly volunteered themselves and ran towards the houses in the village behind them. However, they did not think that with so many villagers noticing the abnormality at the entrance of the village, how could Hassan, an inhuman existence, not notice it? Before those young people could run far, a black figure appeared in front of them. It was a petite and muscular figure. Her body was only wrapped in a few pieces of simple cloth. Although she was not big, the slightly bulging female sexual characteristics proved that she was a woman. The most special thing was that she wore a skull mask on her face. There was no doubt that she was one of Hassan, or rather, she was the Lord 100 Faces in the villagers' mouths. Lord 100 Faces, you're here. As if they had found their pillar of support, the villagers gathered around Hassan, who was a man of many faces. Hurry up and get away from here. If there is a battle, then go to the underground caves and the surrounding mountain walls to take refuge first, Hassan said to the surrounding villagers with a solemn expression. Yes, Lord 100 Faces. The villagers immediately responded. They all knew their limits. If they insisted on staying, there was no doubt that they would add a burden to Hassan. Moreover, if the enemy was weak and did not need their help, Hassan alone could handle it. If the enemy was strong, they would naturally be useless as a burden. Immediately afterward, the villagers began to retreat to the village behind them. If they took a few steps back in advance, they could quickly leave if something happened. At this moment, the black-purple ripples suddenly changed. Like a stone entering the water, the black-purple ripples were stirred. Then a black-haired, red-eyed boy in local costume and a lovely girl with wings came out. It was naturally Wuming and Gopral. The handsome man and the beautiful woman made the villagers a little overwhelmed for a while and relaxed their vigilance. "Who are you?" Hassan asked Wuming vigilantly. She saw that the two people in front of her were servants. On Wuming's side, because someone took the lead to ask him a question as soon as he came out, Wuming was stunned. He was a little surprised by the scene in front of him, but he could accept it because it was reasonable. Because of the vision provided by Abanthi, Wuming's portal could be opened in this village. But Wuming did not expect that the portal he opened would directly open at the entrance of the village, and it was seen by a group of villagers. The strange black-purple ripples naturally brought panic to the villagers, and it also brought suspicion to Hassan. The solution to this situation was to express goodwill. The best way to clear up misunderstandings was to be honest, such as answering the other party's questions truthfully. "I'm a servant of the Saber rank. Real name is Vilo Serenseed. This is the servant of the Berserker rank that I summoned. Real name is Gopral." "What?" Hassan was stunned. For Hassan, who had hundreds of personalities and mastered hundreds of skills, it was easy to judge whether a person was lying through their expression and language. She could see that the other party was not lying, but this was also what shocked Hassan. It wasn't strange for the other party to mention their class. After all, servants always refer to each other by their class. But what was strange was that when the other party mentioned their class, he also mentioned their real name. And it seemed that he was not lying. How could this not shock Hassan? As a servant, Hassan naturally knew the importance of the real name. The real name represented a weakness. If there was no big weakness, it would be fine. If there was a servant like Achilles and Siegfried who had quite obvious weaknesses, it was likely that they would be trapped. However, the other party did not seem to be famous. Gopral had never heard of it at all. As for Vilo Serenseed, Hassan was shocked and entered the battle state. "You are the Lion King's people." Chapter 738. The reason why Hassan thought that Wuming was the Lion King was because of the name Vilo Serenth. Because the enemy was the Lion King, and the name of the Lion King's knights was the same as the name of the Knights of the Round Table. As a Hassan who mastered hundreds of skills, the knowledge of historical stories also existed. As a result, Hassan naturally had information about various heroes. Coincidentally, the information about the Knights of the Round Table was also in her mind. After investigation, she naturally investigated the Lion King who occupied the Holy City and his knights. She found that the Lion King's knights might be the Knights of the Round Table. Why was she so sure? It was because they were servants. The Lion King and his knights, who suddenly appeared, defeated the Lionheart King after a fierce battle and occupied the Holy City. This was not the era of Huga Hassan. Huga Hassan also understood that she herself was a follower. Therefore, Huga Hassan guessed that the Lion King of the Holy City and his knights were also followers. After knowing that the Lion King's knights had the same name as the Knights of the Round Table, she doubted whether the Lion King was King Arthur. However, because the Lion King lived in seclusion and the Holy City was extremely difficult to sneak in, Hassan had never seen the Lion King. However, Hassan had seen a few people like Gawain, Lancelot, Agul, Mordred, Tristan, and the like. Not only her, but her compatriots, Cursed Wrist Hassan and Drunk Smoke Hassan, had also seen those people. According to the books, those people were most likely the Knights of the Round Table. Vilo Serenth was also the name of the Knights of the Round Table. Together with the Knights of the Round Table and the Holy City, it was impossible for Hassan not to misunderstand. "I'm Vilo Serenth, a knight of the Round Table, but I'm not from the Holy City," Wu Ming explained helplessly. Wu Ming changed into the clothes of the Eastern Wind because he was afraid that the mountain people would think that he was a knight of the Round Table. This was realized. Wu Ming didn't have a problem with revealing his weakness if he revealed his name. The reason why Wu Ming told Wu Ming his real name was because he had no weaknesses, so he was not afraid of being targeted. Gopral was even more so because she was a guest from another world. In addition, Wu Ming didn't think that anyone would recognize him, so he reported his name without hesitation. But he didn't expect the servant in front of him to recognize the character that his name represented. I can only say that is expected of Hassan. Wu Ming sighed inwardly. As an assassin, her ability to gather information was naturally not weak. Wu Ming did not know much about the Middle East. In Wu Ming's opinion, there should not be any books about the Knights of the Round Table here, which was shrouded in war and apocalypse. However, Wu Ming did not think that Hassan might have known about the Knights of the Round Table for a long time. "You want to lie to me? Don't even think about it." Hassan didn't listen to Wu Ming. If her analysis was correct, the Lion King was King Arthur, and she had never seen a Knight of the Round Table who was independent of the Holy City's forces. "Damn Knight, not only did you harm my compatriots, but you also want to kill all of us. I will never let you go." Hassan rushed to Wu Ming as if he was blinded by anger. In an instant, silhouettes of different sizes and genders appeared beside Hassan. Clones of the spiritual base? "You are Hassan of the Round Table." Wu Ming saw the identity of Hassan of the Round Table at a glance. The assassin class card made by Julian contained the power of almost all Hassans except the first Hassan. As someone who had studied the assassin class card, Wu Ming naturally understood the ability of each Hassan to be able to create a large number of clones that were not illusions, except for Hassan of the Round Table, who is now known as the existence of multiple personalities. There should be no Hassan who could do it. "And you say you are not from the Holy City?" Hassan of the Round Table responded angrily. Those who were familiar with her were either her friends or her enemies. She naturally couldn't be friends with any Knights of the Round Table, so there was only one answer. "Enemy, die!" Countless figures surrounded Wu Ming and Gopral, and then swarmed up as if they were going to fight to the death. Wu Ming saw that the other party did not listen to his explanation and shook his head helplessly. Could it be that because the other party had multiple personalities, he had some mental problems? Wu Ming remembered that Gadotsi also said that they had met Hassan of the Round Table when they were in the desert. When the other party saw the pattern on Matthew's shield, he thought that Matthew was from the Holy City and directly abandoned the kidnapped Nidakells and ran away. Wu Ming decided not to explain to the mental patient and beat him first. "Gopral," Wu Ming said casually. "Yes," Gopral responded with a smile. And then the magic power in her body was released. The magic power that was comparable to a low-level noble relic was released and instantly broke the clones of the Round Table that surrounded Wu Ming and Gopral. Although Gopral's magic power release broke many of the clones, there were still many clones around the village entrance. "Damn it, at least we have to buy time for the villagers." Hassan of the Round Table, as the main body, was hidden among the clones, looking at the villagers who had begun to retreat and gritted his teeth. Then, one of the clones left and ran toward the villagers. The clones would give the villagers the direction of escape. The enemy was a Holy City Knight, and it was no longer safe to hide in the underground shelter of the mountain. After she was defeated or killed, the other party would definitely be able to find that shelter. So, the Round Table let her clones guide the villagers to the cursed Rist in the east, while her main body stayed behind to resist the enemy. After Hassan of the Round Table guessed that the other party was a Holy City Knight, he was not prepared to leave alive. A clone was a clone after all. Disregarding everything else, the clone's strength was much weaker than the main body. Otherwise, the clones that besieged Wu Ming and Gopral in the beginning would not have been directly destroyed by Gopral's magic power release. In short, the main body could not leave. This was indeed strange for her as an assassin. After all, an assassin was not suitable for direct combat. If she could run, the Round Table would not hesitate. Just like when she met the Holy City Knight when she kidnapped the Sun King in the desert, she would have chosen to run because she had no compatriots to protect behind her. But she could not do that now. The village was behind her, and the villagers were ordinary people. If she did not hold back the enemy, the villagers would not be able to escape. I hope they can escape to the cursed wrist in the east. Bai Qian prayed in her heart. The village she was in was located in the west of the mountains, and the cursed wrist was located in the east of the mountains. Although the villages on both sides were not far away, they were not close either. Everything would be fine if they escaped, because she had seen the cursed wrist Hassan before. The other party was the current generation's Hassan, a qualified Hassan, and would not leave the villagers in the west village alone. But all this depended on the round table Hassan being able to hold back Wuming and Gopril. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.